hold up traffic in Titusville for 45 minutes, which led to some very interesting hand gestures from Titusville residents to our conference attendees. It wasn't in the paper, but I assure you it happened. Okay, we're going to try to avoid that this year, and then we're going to have a great celebration up at the Titusville Ironworks. So, as you can tell from our conference, we kind of make this up as we go along. Every year, our saying is bigger and better, and the way we make this better is that we have not just more activities, but better quality speakers. And we also have a variety of speakers. Earlier today, we heard from Mike Summers from API, which has a long history with this site. But we also, and API as an association represents an industry as a whole, and in a way looks at it from an almost nonprofit standpoint, like the Drake Energy Security Forum. We are very, very pro getting the private sector back involved in energy and considering it not just here in Pennsylvania, but throughout the country, and trying to get their views across and get questions about their views to them and to dialogue with them about the future of energy and environmental security. So last year we heard from Nick DeUlius from CNX Resources. It was really interesting, I thought, very thought-provoking, led to a lot of sharp questions and so on. This year, I'm very pleased to say that, and I've had a chance to get to know our speaker, Mark Pearson, the last couple of days. He's president and CEO of Liberty Resources. He comes from a long history in energy. I had a chance to be with him in a conference organized by Sid Green last week, which concerned the role of minerals, but not only. And I thought that he had just an absolutely wonderful perspective on what we're talking about here, and particularly concerning the production of natural gas, which he knows a hell of a lot about how it used to be, and how we might perceive it, and how it is now, and where it might be going. So without further ado, I'm going to step aside and give you Mark Pearson.
Thank you, everyone, for the warm Western Pennsylvania greeting and welcome. Go Steelers. Yeah, 4-1. I'm originally from the UK, but my American home is a place called Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because I started my career with Gulf Oil over 40 years ago. And it is wonderful to be back here and to be spending a couple of days in Western Pennsylvania. In fact, when I met with Andrew a couple of nights ago, I told him, gosh, I got to remember when I was up here, but I went canoeing up on one of the rivers here, and he kind of guided me towards where it might have been, and I was able to find the location. So it is great to be back. My talk that I put together here today is technology and better environmental practices that are driving the oil and gas industry. And so there's two messages that I want to try and get across to you today. One is to talk a little bit about what's the technology behind the shale revolution that's different from the conventional oil and gas revolution, and to give you a little history so that when you walk away from this, you've got a little bit more knowledge than what you had when you came in terms of what's driving this. And then my own company, we're a private operator. We've been operating in the Bakken Shale in North Dakota and Wyoming for the last 15 years. And I just want to show examples of how our company and how our industry, today's oil and gas industry, with all deference to our friends at Oldsmobile, is not your father's oil field. How this industry operates today is very different to how it operated 10 years ago, and particularly 20 or 40 years ago when I first entered the industry. A little bit on my background. I'm a mining engineer by background. Studied in the UK, BS and PhD, but my PhD was in fracking, how to crack rock with different methodologies of fracturing the rock. In fact, we often talk about in the shale industry that we're really mining the resource today. We're not just drilling a hole in and sucking it out. We're actually mining the hydrocarbon that is in the rock. I've over 40 years in the industry. I started with big companies, learned a lot of stuff there with Gulf Oil, with Arco. Spent 7 years living in Alaska doing North Slope development, where I learned a lot of the interdisciplinary measures that go into oil and gas development work. I taught at Colorado School of Mines for a couple of years. I ran a public service company for a time, and then for nearly 20 years now, I decided to go snowboarding. I decided to go running an oil and gas companies, private oil and gas companies in Denver, and snowboarding at the weekends with my kids and my wife. Currently Liberty Resources 2, we just sold our assets. They were at 20,000 barrels a day. We sold those assets, and we're actually in the process of launching Liberty Resources 3, and I'll maybe talk a little bit about that on the panel later this afternoon and what's driving us at looking at natural gas. I also chair an oil field services company, and I'm a tech guy. I've presented or published nearly 60 papers over my career, and different things, had a number of awards from our technical society, the Society of Petroleum Engineering, and I'm at the point in my career where I've kind of gone through a lot of companies, or rather they've gone through me, and I appreciate, Andrew, the opportunity to come and share some of that with you. Okay, we're going to talk about the shale basins. If you haven't seen this map, the orange is where you see where the shale basins are, and of course here, we're in the Marcellus and the Utica that we're looking at, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the two basins that drove the oil and gas industry and the shale revolution. The first is the Barnett Shale in North Texas, and the second is the Bakken in North Dakota, where I've been operating, and I've had the privilege to be working the last 15 years. Okay, so Fort Worth, it's on the Fort Worth Basin where the Barnett Shale is. It was just the first rock, the first shale rock that was actually commercially exploited in a significant manner. And by shale, it's just very tight rock. Very tight, meaning hydrocarbon, water, air even, it's very hard to flow. We measure it in something called nanodarcies, which are 10 to the -9 of a darcy. That's a flow unit that we use in hydrology and in petroleum engineering. And first production out of this Barnett Shale actually happened way back in time in, it was 1977. And the production there, in 1997, and the production for the next, I can't even read it myself, 76, it was actually at the end of 76. And production for the next 20 plus years, you can see, was just very small, up to 5 million cubic feet a day. Not a lot as operators tried new wells, drilled new wells, tried to stimulate the rock, try to get hydrocarbon to flow. And then in 2002, one of the operators there did an experiment where they had a vertical well and they had an offset well that they put some listening devices way down in it, and they pumped a new type of frac called a slick water frac. And when they did that, they measured the noise being emanated by the cracks as they were generating, and then mapped them out and realized that we were actually creating, with this slick water fracturing, a much more complex fracture network for production. And what happened there is that was a very successful well. The operator drilled 7 vertical wells, fracked them with this slick water production. And here's a production plot, a cumulative frequency plot. Those 7 wells averaged their first 6 months just under 1 million cubic foot a day, 0.84 million cubic feet a day of production. And that was an impressive gain over what had been going on the prior 25 years. And then engineers kind of looked at this map some more and thought, well, what if we actually drilled a horizontal well going northwest here and actually did a whole series of fracs down it? And so they actually tried that in some wells. They ran 21 wells. Some of them were cemented, some of them were not cemented, and more than doubled the production coming out of the wells. In fact, I can remember in 2005 being in my office in Dallas, and kind of the report came over from someone, gosh, did you just hear in the Barnett Shale, company XXX just did 15 frac stages in a well, in a Barnett Shale well, and suddenly things changed. Well, this was the production on a different scale of that first 25 years from 1976 onwards. And this is what happened. Production just grew in 5 years, grew from 2005 to 2010 to 1.8 BCF, billion cubic feet a day of production. Since then, the field has peaked. It's now producing about 800 million cubic feet a day of gas. But a total step change, that was the shale revolution. That was the start of it in the Barnett Shale. Well, here's a plot from the Energy Information Agency. And you can see back in 2008, the orange bar there, that orange wedge, that was the Barnett Shale, over half of U.S. natural gas production from shales back in 2008. But as we took those lessons to other basins, you see the Haynesville coming on, you see the Permian growing, and of course, what you know here, Pennsylvania, the Marcellus Shale, growing to the largest natural gas producer in the country today. In fact, it's kind of interesting that 85 BCF a day of gas coming out of shale represents 80% of all of the natural gas being produced in the United States. This is from a resource that didn't even produce 25 years ago or didn't economically produce. 80% of our natural gas, that we're talking about natural gas powering everything here, was from a technology that we didn't have commercially available 20 plus years ago. Well, my own company, I've been working over 15 years in the Bakken in North Dakota. Our company's headquartered in Denver, Colorado, operate in Wyoming and North Dakota. And if you look at a map, this is what's called a structure map. So the contours are the depth of the rock. And so where it's hottest, it's deepest there. That's about 250 miles across, 350 miles north to south, covering western North Dakota and eastern Montana there. And what I've done there is I've just plotted a little black dot for every well that was drilled in this time period. So from 1953, when first Bakken oil production started in North Dakota, to 1970, there were 50 wells drilled. And you can see they were kind of in a line there. They were on a geographical arch called the Antelope Arch. It was just an anticline that had some natural fracturing associated with it. So when vertical wells drilled in, they would produce. And over the next period of time, from the next 15 years, from 71 to 86, industry was drilling 8 wells a year. And those 8 wells were along structural features, something called the Nesson Anticline, that's that northern feature in the middle right, and also on the southwest on another structurally faulted area called the Billings Nose. And then we started horizontal drilling. We found down in that Billings Nose area that we could drill horizontal wells into the natural fractures, and they'd actually produce a little better. And then development shifted to Montana, to a subfacies, a type of rock at the edge of the basin called the Elm Coulee Field. And we had a period of 5 years where development was focused primarily in the Elm Coulee, Montana area, drilling 100 wells per year. And then industry found on the eastern side of the basin a similar thing, better quality rocks. And so the wells were drilled on the east and the west of the basin. And the first few wells were drilled in the middle part. We call that the central basin. But those wells were totally uneconomic. In fact, here's a plot showing some of the first wells are on the bottom here, that in a 6-year period, those wells cumed a total of about 60,000 barrels of oil. Okay, now 60,000 barrels of oil, right? If oil is if oil is $50 a barrel and 60,000 barrels of oil in 6 years, that's $3 million of revenue for a well that cost you $8, $9, $10 million. Plus you've got to pay taxes, plus you've got to pay royalty owners. Totally uneconomic. But what we found is that as we divided up the sections of the well into mechanically isolated different parts, and we call those stages, mechanical stages, and do different fracs in each of those stages, suddenly we go from 60,000 barrels in 6 years to 60,000 barrels in 3 to 6 months. And suddenly the economics have totally changed through the application of the technology of how we're fracking the rocks downhole. Well, what happened? The whole basin gets filled in, drilling 1,500 wells per year, 11,000 wells drilled in a 6-year period. Things were pretty crazy in the Bakken during this period. And today, a more gentle, sort of sustained level of just under 900 wells a year being drilled. Production in the Bakken, production went from 100,000 barrels a day in North Dakota, conventional and unconventional here, to 1.5 million barrels a day. And today it's plateauing out at around 1.15 million barrels a day of oil. So that was the first shale oil development that became economic. Again, similar to what happened in the gas markets, the oil markets were the same. The color hasn't quite come out here. On the top, there's a pink area that we've gone from 300,000 barrels a day from tight oil production to 9 million barrels a day. And that top wedge is the Permian Basin that's driving U.S. oil production. 9 million barrels a day from shale oil production out of 13.4 million barrels a day. About 75% of our oil production is coming from these shale oil reservoirs. You see the Bakken is still there, the second largest production, the Eagle Ford in Texas, the Niobrara Codell in Colorado, and then a number of other plays. So again, in 20 years, totally changed the U.S. energy position, not from oil being created, but by the application of technology, changing a resource into a reserve. Okay, well, what's really driven that? What's driven it has been this technology that the media likes to call fracking. A tech guy like me, we call it hydraulic fracturing, but we can call it fracking today. I don't have a problem with that. If you look, fracking was developed in 1947 by a predecessor company of Amoco called the Staniland Oil Company. First wells fractured were in Kansas and then Oklahoma, and then it spread from there. And what I've got a plot of here is just the number of wells per year that were fracked and the percentage of the total number of wells. And you can see that in the first 35 years, about 40% of all the wells in the U.S. were being fracked using hydraulic fracturing. Drilling peaked in the U.S. in 1981, December of 1981, with 4,500 drill rigs running, and we were producing about 8.5 million barrels a day of oil. So 4,500 drilling rigs and producing 8.5 million barrels a day. Well, then fracking really took over. So the brown dashed line, over 90% of all wells, 95% of all wells are fractured today in the United States. And you see a little blue wedge right at the bottom? We're just beginning to see horizontal drilling and horizontal applications taking off. A lot of those to fractured carbonate formations that were not fractured. And then the beginning of maybe 25, 35% of wells being fractured. And then look at what's happened in the shale revolution. The percentage of wells that are horizontal wells that are being fractured are just taking off, and with over 90% of our wells now. But our industry is now, blue bars, a horizontal industry. So it's a horizontal industry, whereas 25 years ago it was a vertical industry. It's a fracked industry as opposed to a half and half fracked and unfracked industry. Well, what's that resulted in? It used to be that drilling of wells was the most important thing and the largest capital spend in our industry. Today, the fracking and supplying water is more than double the amount of expenditures compared to drilling. And in fact, drilling, the actual drilling of the wells is only the fourth largest component of being an oil and gas developer today. So big change that we're really a fracking industry as opposed to a drilling industry. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the environmental sides of that because it's really important. I consider myself an environmentalist. I also happen to be pro-development. So I want to talk about three things here of how industry and companies like mine have reduced our environmental footprint. And we'll talk about surface land use, noise and traffic, and reduced emissions. In the old days, in the 70s and 80s, when I entered this industry, if we had a 2-mile by 1-mile area that we would call it a spacing unit, a drilling spacing unit we were going to develop, we would perhaps develop it with 32 wells like this on 40-acre spacing or 64 wells on 20-acre spacing. In fact, I was flying out of the Midland Airport just a couple of months ago, runway 34, and you look out to the left as I'm taking off, and this is what you see in Midland. And what you see 8 rows of wells per mile here. It's 20-acre spacing, vertical well development. A lot of surface use. Every 660 foot, another pad, another drilling pad impacting the environment. Well, today, we developed that 2-mile by 1-mile spacing unit with 4 wells typically in the industry. And they're spaced 1,300 feet apart, but just 4 individual wells. And if you choose to come to the Centennial State and come to Colorado, and you fly into Denver Airport, this is what you're going to see about 10 miles to the north of Denver. Those pads are 4 miles apart. We've gone from 660-foot spacing to 4 miles apart for these pads for horizontal well drilling. And the drilling itself, I pulled up here. This is a picture I just happen to have in my archives of a development I was working in Wyoming 20-plus years ago. It was standard to have a pit. It's a lined pit. It's monitored by the state. We called it a mud pit or a reserve pit. All of our drilling muds that we were drilling out these wells, everything went into this. It had to be reclaimed. The liners are folded in, but you're burying the waste on location on each pad. That was standard operating practice 20 years ago. Today, no drill cuttings, no reserve mud pits in the industry. We dewater the muds, we recycle it, we dewater it, and the solids that are left are hauled to a permitted location. We have walking rigs. This is a standard rig. This is from one of our operations. These rigs can stand up and just walk from one location to the other. We used to have to move location, have trucks, 50, 60 trucks, moving a rig, taking it down, moving it. A rig will typically stay on location 2 to 3 months or even longer in one location and reduce the amount of traffic. From a safety standpoint, we have automated pipe handling systems so people are not getting their fingers caught and so on, and we don't have the same accidents. And a significant number of our rigs are dual fuel rigs, meaning they can run on natural gas as well as diesel. And there are a number of rigs that are electric rigs as well. So the completions, I'm going to talk about that part of our business. The completions is the connection of the well to the rock. So everyone talks about the oil and gas industry as the drilling of wells. I would actually argue as the completions engineer that is actually connecting the rock to the pipe that's going to connect it to, and transport the oil and gas to the surface. We call that completions engineering. This is an aerial picture of a frac site that I was running 35 years ago in East Texas, the Cotton Valley Formation. And you see that big area, 20-acre pad location. 2/3 of it filled with big tanks that are filled with the water that we're going to frack. On the left-hand side, these yellow transports here, they're sand units. Each of those are containing about 300,000 pounds of sand. And they would take about 4 days round the clock or a week working just daylight just to fill up all of the sand and the fluids and all the traffic that was going to location there. A lot of potential for fluids, a lot of temporary hoses that were hooked up, equipment that would come on location in the afternoon, rig up, spend 1 day fracking, and leave and go to the next location and road to the next location. Well, here's a modern day frac site. Okay, and what do you see the difference? There's only a few tanks there because everything's being pipelined. They're just the working tanks, the holding tanks. Down at the bottom here, we have our chemicals that are coming to location. Typical chemicals that you're going to find in your own kitchen, but they're all contained in chemical transports here with pads around them to make sure that if there is a drip, if there is any leakage, it's not going on the ground. Our sand here is coming in containers that are gravity-fed containers. We're not blowing sand and silica dust into the air for the employees and the public to breathe. The fluids and the sand are mixed together in a couple of blending units. It then goes to the horsepower that is going to provide the energy to crack the rock. We control everything in a control van, and then it goes down the wellheads. And what's interesting in our industry as well is that, okay, this is one of my own locations here where we're fracking and cracking the rock. But you notice here at the foreground, we've got all the production tanks, all the production facilities already built, because we're also running something that we call green completions. So when the well starts flowing back, we've already got all the production facilities built, and the gas is not being flared, it's being captured straight away and sent to a pipeline. Let's just move on.
Standing right next to the houses that are 500 feet away. And right now we're fracking at 80 barrels a minute. See if you can hear it. Can't hear anything.
So in areas like Denver, where the DJ Basin has come up against development, we can even be fracking and running our wells very close without disturbing neighbors, disturbing the population around us. Okay, quickly, let me just finish up with a little bit on production operations and the kind of things that industry is doing. This is just a shot of one of our company's production facilities. You can see there that everything is surrounded by steel dikes to protect for a spill. On the right-hand side, you can see that we've got hermetically sealed liners underneath all the tanks, so that if there is a spill, that it doesn't go in the land, doesn't cause any pollution whatsoever. On our vapor recoveries from our tanks, all of the vapors are recovered. At one time, industry would typically be flaring that gas, became an issue, so industry started installing something called vapor recovery units. I happen to be on location on the startup of one here. We go from 500,000 cubic feet a day of gas being flared to very little, and once we sort it out after a few days, to nothing being flared on location. One of the sources of methane emissions on oil and gas operations are our separators. These are three-phase separators that separate oil, water, and gas that comes out of the well. The gas comes up at the top part of those units. And then there are level controllers that used to be gas-operated, natural gas-operated. They were causing 65% of the leakage of methane gas on our locations. Many companies now have changed those all out to electric controllers so that we're not leaking the gas. So again, just continuous improvement in operations in how we run our business. Number of other industry improvements as well in operating practices to reduce our impact. So my summary thoughts: today's unconventional oil and gas industry is not your father's industry. Horizontal drilling has allowed the industry to be much more concentrated and spatially separated than earlier industry development. Significantly less land use, less traffic and noise, and that concentration allows the economic justification for better health, safety, and environmental investments and procedures. Operations frequently have reduced emissions with natural gas or electric-powered units. There is zero waste left buried on location. Our central production facilities reduce leaks and emissions per well, and detailed and regular leak surveys are mandated, and the standard operating procedures are mandated by the states in which we operate. And many operators have gone to continuous emissions and leak monitoring as well to report, as Mike was talking about this morning. So the USA is an energy powerhouse, producing more oil and gas than any other country, with some of the cleanest environmental standards in the world, and an industry that is committed to continuous environmental improvement. So with that, I'll say thank you. I'll leave you with a couple of slides here. One is a drilling rig up in the plains in North Dakota, a canola field next door to our operations running away, and also to remind people in places like North Dakota, for 4 or 5 months of the year, this is actually a better picture of what we're working with than the top ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We are running a little bit over time, but does anybody have any questions for this very, I thought, detailed and thought-provoking presentation? Mark's not going away, so you'll have plenty of time to interact with him as well. Anybody? Okay.
Many thanks.
Just one quick question. Can you talk about produced water? I keep hearing this is a big challenge in the Permian Basin. Is that a challenge in the Bakken too? And maybe explain what the industry is doing to deal with this challenge and what you need from regulators to help solve it.
Yeah, produced water, when we produce fluids out of the rock, we got water, oil, and gas. In the middle, in the deepest part of the basins, we tend to have more oil than gas. As we move out and becomes thermally less mature, we typically end up with more water than we do oil. So for every barrel of oil, in my company's operations, we were producing 3 barrels of water. Most of that is re-injected into deep aquifers. The industry has run into problems in some geographic areas, like in the mid-continent, a little bit in the Permian because of the volumes, if it's high volumes, or if those injection zones are close to basement rocks. And so that was a big change that happened in Oklahoma and the mid-continent. So I think it's being regulated. I think it's being regulated appropriately by the states that are in charge of regulating underground disposal and so on. And it's just part of the business of putting back in to deep formations that are already full, already have saline water in them, putting produced water, brine water, back in. It's a continuous process, but I think it's being appropriately regulated. Where there are issues, the state regulators are stepping in and making sure that good industry practices, good operating practices are being maintained. Sid?
Mark, we've seen such drastic changes the last quarter century. What would your speculations on what we might see in the next quarter century? I'll be gone, but a lot of people here will be around yet.
I think it's continuous improvement. We're still working on engineering these fracs, and we even use the term now, mining the hydrocarbon out of the rocks. So the engineering of that is something that industry is still studying, putting instrumentation, fiber optic cables, listening devices and so on downhole, so that we can understand that and can engineer it better. So I think you're going to continue to see improvement in that technology. But as I mentioned earlier this morning, there is hundreds of years of resource available. And so we will continue to see that technology development and the application of that technology.
Please join me with a round of applause for Mark.
Thank you.
If I could ask the next panel to come up and we'll move some chairs off here because I think we're pretty crowded. Our final panels will be a little smaller.
Do you have those slides?
Only about a third of natural gas consumption travels across borders, and only about a third of that travels by ship. But it can make a very big difference in the world. And so what I have here with me today, I'm very pleased to have a panel full of different, diverse perspectives on this topic. We're going to start at the far end. Ben Cale is Director of Energy Markets and Policy at the Center for Energy and Environmental Systems Analysis at UT Austin. He's also a non-resident fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute, and I know him in also my capacity as an affiliate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Next to him is Francesco Maria Graziani, who's Counselor for Energy and Climate at the EU delegation, the European delegation to the US in Washington, and he is I think going to be a very useful voice in understanding this topic and this discussion. A lot to share and a lot to learn from Francesco. And then to my immediate right is Fred Hutchison, who is the president and CEO of the U.S. LNG Association, which I still call all the time LNG for Allies, because that's what they've been advocating for years and years. And he is also, I think, importantly, this year, the winner of an award called the Transatlantic Bridge Awards, which recognizes, among other things, contributions to, well, as it sounds, the transatlantic cooperation. And cooperation on energy was extremely important. What I'd like to do is I'd like to give each of the three panelists a very short opportunity for introductory remarks. We'll go in the same order, and then I'm going to pepper them with questions, which are going to inspire your questions, and then we'll go to your questions. Ben, why don't we start with you?
All right, thanks, Kevin, and thank you to Andrew and everyone at the Drake Energy Forum for inviting me here. It's my first time here. It's a beautiful part of the state and a great event, so congrats on everything. So I cover U.S. LNG. I've covered the market and geopolitical impacts of U.S. LNG exports, which have been dramatic. I mean, this is a relatively new industry in the United States. LNG exports technically existed for a long time. It started in Alaska way back in the 1960s, end of the 1960s. That facility ran dry a long time ago. It really only began in 2016, as Landon mentioned today, and it's had a massive geopolitical impact in the last couple of years. What happened in the United States is that it increased huge volumes of U.S. LNG exports at a time when the market needed it, and also a unique flexibility that was really valued in the market. And we saw this after the Russia-Ukraine war, that the flexible nature of U.S. volumes proved absolutely essential. This is at a time when Europe really needed all the volumes that it could get, and the flexibility and the liquidity that the U.S. added to that global gas market meant that Europe could attract those volumes. It was able to draw them away from Asia and other regions by paying a higher price, but that really kept the lights on and was absolutely essential for energy security. So the industry is growing and growing. We'll get into some of the scale of the capacity additions that's happening now. What excites me is that this huge growth that's happening in LNG exports is also happening at a time when we know more and more about the emissions impact of natural gas, and the industry is really making big strides in driving down emissions. And that's something that I focus on and my team focuses on at UT.
Thanks, Ben. Francesca?
Yes, thank you, Kevin. And
I must say, like, I start always with an anecdote, and the anecdote is that as soon as I met Andrew in DC, in a bar there, I immediately knew that I had to say yes to his invite, because this would be like an incredible experience, and it has been so far. It's a beautiful state, so thank you very much, Andrew and team. You're doing like a fantastic job of putting all this together. And from my perspective, the thing that really struck me the most these 2 days of deep discussions is the fact that whenever we talk about like energy dominance, whenever we talk about like the incredible revolution that the shale has constituted for this country, we are talking about like also a huge geopolitical shift from this country being like the biggest net importer to being the biggest net exporter. And all this happened in 10 years. This is absolutely unprecedented in, I think, human history, can we say that? We've assisted for 40, 50, 60 years to the biggest net fiscal transfer of wealth from this country to the Middle East. And now something, the other side is happening. So Europe is clearly like part of this revolution. We shouldn't forget that Europe is the biggest buyer of US gas, and as the biggest consumers, we always are right. We should not forget the fact that the European Union is and will continue to be for a foreseeable future the main buyer of US LNG. Just one figure, and then I don't want to get too nerdy, but we can go into that later. There is a clear uptick in US exports to Europe. Right now, US LNG represents around 58% last month of the entire imports of LNG for Europe. It's up from like clearly before the war, but like it's a dramatic shift that we're seeing month after month, and this is clearly due to the fact also that we have to diversify away from Russian fuels. But we can delve into that.
Okay, thank you. So we learned that gas is transformational, LNG in particular, and Europe is always right. Fred, take us home.
Well, thank you, Kevin. So LNG Allies is who we are, where we started. We are formally the U.S. LNG Association, but we've always focused on the foreign customers and the importance of what's produced here in Pennsylvania and other states to the health, well-being, and security of our friends around the world, including our friends who are always right in Europe. I am no stranger to this part of Pennsylvania. It turns out that I started the Allegheny Forest Alliance in 1996. And so I have spent many, many days in places like Kane and Marionville and Ridgeway and Warren and Bradford. And I can tell you that as I came back, this is the first time that I've been back in a very long time, I was struck by several things. I remember from before how frustrating it was to be stuck behind logging trucks, right? And, but that was maybe the downside. The best part of this part of Pennsylvania, in my view, is that you have drive-through places where you can get beer, right? Put the truck, open up the tailgate, and you can get beer. But I'm also reminded that this part of Pennsylvania is so big on the holidays. This third quarter of the year is so amazing in this part of Pennsylvania. People get so excited and they get so into the festivals of the year. Sure enough, as I drove this morning here, I noticed that there was a skeleton on virtually every porch I passed. And Washington, D.C., except most of our skeletons are still in the closet. So.
Wonderful. So I think we can all appreciate the diversity of Fred's background. Not only has he personally transitioned from biomass to natural gas, but he has experience in ethanol. Look, we're in a situation where LNG was the MVP in 2022. I recall sitting in 2019 before the Senate Energy Committee being asked by a couple of senators, Senator Barrasso among them, if the U.S. could substitute for Russian gas. And the answer at the time was no. Actually, not yet. Soon, maybe, Senator, I said, and they kept asking. I think they wanted a really good news story. And they have it. They have it now. We have a moment in time where that did substantially happen. In a time of great crisis. But this year is an even more interesting year. Now we have talk of $250 billion a year in energy purchases from our friends in Europe, from the US, through 2028, and LNG expected to be a prominent player in all that. The implication is that that's a lot of LNG. In fact, that's more LNG than we export to the world, so it can't be all LNG. But to the extent that it is LNG, are there supply limitations on the US side? Are there demand constraints on the European side? I'd like to ask each of the panelists to reflect on maybe what that $250 billion a year means for LNG. Ben, we'll start with you and we'll go down the line.
Sure. Well, I think that $250 billion target is aspirational. Last year, US-EU energy trade was about $70 billion, I think, total. That includes crude oil, petroleum products, and LNG. But obviously, LNG is a big part of this picture. I mean, what's happened in the last couple of years is a tremendous growth in US LNG exports to Europe. It was about 45% of US LNG imports in 2023 and 2024, more this year. Actually, a pretty dramatic increase, as Francesco mentioned. It is important to keep in mind, though, that at the end of the day, governments don't sign gas contracts, companies sign them. So the European Commission and the United States government can set this target. It really depends on what the commercial actors do. And here, I think it's important to touch on something that I mentioned earlier, which is the nature of US LNG. Most US LNG cargoes are exported free on board. What that means is basically, if you're the buyer, you take title to the ship at the terminal, you arrange your shipping, you can send it wherever you want, wherever you can fetch the best price and earn the best profit. And that means sometimes it goes to Asia, might be Japan or South Korea, it could be someplace in Southeast Asia, or if the prices are stronger in Europe, it'll end up there. So we don't necessarily need to over-engineer where these volumes go. As long as the United States puts it on the market, it's adding to that growth, that fluidity in the market, and the volumes, which will help lower prices for everyone. That benefits the European Union. It also benefits gas buyers in places like Southeast Asia and South Asia and elsewhere. On the supply side, I mean, there's a hell of a lot of LNG coming from the United States. We have 2 projects that are in the commissioning phase. I think we have 7 more now that have reached final investment decision and are being built. There have been basically 3 LNG supply waves that have happened since the mid-2000s. This is by far the biggest one, and there's more coming. So all that's kind of predicated on cheap, abundant supply. There's certainly enough to support this 3rd wave. If we have more and more big LNG projects produced, I think it starts to raise more questions about price, and we'll probably get into that.
We will. Francesco?
Yes, I think I would address your question from a demand side on the kind of homework that the European Commission in particular has done in terms of like giving policy stability and the right policy signal that doesn't change from now to possibly 2050. And then on the supply side, to understand, especially since we are here in Pennsylvania, what we could work together under a transatlantic partnership umbrella in order to like unleash really like potential exports from this shale and not only the Permian side of things. So from the demand side, we have in 2019 we came up with the climate law. The climate law is our let's say legislative statute that imposes us as a continent to be net zero in 2050. And there, I think a lot of observators, not only in Europe but also in this side of the Atlantic, have not like read the impact assessment accompanying the climate law. And I understand that it's hundreds of pages of very boring stuff. And for people like me that talk like about like the general systems and like also in Brussels try to see at the political side of things, it's incredibly difficult to delve into details. But there, we already studied how our energy system will look like in Europe in 2050. And not only in 2050, in 2040, 35, 30, 25. And there we see already back in 2019, so when we were at the apex of the Green Deal push, we already saw that in 2050 there would still be gas in our system. There would still be oil, mostly abated, but there will still be. And this was before both the invasion of Russia, of Ukraine, and the ensuing energy crisis. So I think we should already put these things in context. So from the demand side, we see that gas is an integral part of our energy mix. We will be for the decades to come. And from a regulatory standpoint, in terms of policy stability, it's in our statutes, in our regulations, that until 2050, there is absolutely no obstacle for European companies. You mentioned a very important point, Ben, that it's not the European Commission buying gas, but it's our companies, European companies. But here and there I heard, yeah, but they have regulatory hurdles for that. No, it's not true. Until 2050, European companies can get into long-term contracts for gas supply. So this from the demand side. On the supply side, you are here in Pennsylvania, and before I joined the EU delegation in Washington, D.C. 2 years ago, I didn't know that actually I thought, thinking of gas as Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico maybe business. But actually, here we are sitting on the biggest reservoir of gas. And it's incredible. When I invited our friends of the Marcellus Shale Coalition to DC to talk with my ambassador, they mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, Fred, that only 3% of these molecules that are produced here could be exported. Something like that. And the important thing is that it's a very small number. And if you consider that in this environment of very depressed or very low gas prices in the US right now, Europe gas prices, wholesale gas prices are more than 3 times hurry-up prices. You can imagine, you can make like a fast math to understand what that means. And I say that not as a way of like, oh, I love paying gas more, but if we manage to have those molecules through, for example, a pipeline going to the East Coast, reach a terminal, a liquefaction terminal in the East Coast, and then be shipped to Europe, clearly that would have like a downward pressure on European prices too. So it's also a selfish kind of statement.
Fred.
So I'm going to be really quick on this topic. So this $750 billion number is was something that garnered a lot of criticism, and I felt that, and what we said to both our negotiators in the USTR and to Commissioner Šefčovič and the commissioners over in the EU was, listen, thank you. You have set up the beginning of, through this framework, a very good long-term framework for U.S.-European energy cooperation. It included not just gas, it also included nuclear components. And the math on this is when you stop and think that for every long-term contract that is signed between a European buyer and a U.S. supplier, it could generate 20, 30, 40, $50 billion over the lifetime of that 20-year contract. And so how you count it, and it's missing the bigger picture of what this framework represents, which is a clear statement of a long-term commitment to partner with each other to make things work. Now, as Francesco said, can we do a lot more? Yes, it's absolutely imperative that we build more pipelines, that we look to see where we can get terminals closer to this supply up here. So we're all in on this program. So
I just want to highlight what Fred just did. Very deftly employed something that I like to refer to as political math. Instead of counting the molecules that transit customs every year, he said you can count the total value of a 20-year contract. And the spirit of the thing is, well, yeah, why stop at year 3? Why stop at the end of year 3? This, to the extent that I think you described this, Ben, as an aspirational goal, sets in place a long-term cooperation framework. Shoot for the moon, end up in space, call it victory. And if you're moving 20-year contracts and counting it as part of the $750 billion, well, more's the better. But let me ask an impolite question. Europe is the largest hydrocarbon import market in the world. It is also the former principal buyer of Russian gas. Russian President Vladimir Putin has made it very clear that as part of any settlement that should come out of the war in Ukraine, he would like to be able to restore that market. He'd like to have the European market back. How does that present a threat to U.S. LNG? Does it present a threat? Who would like to take this extremely volatile jump ball? I'm trying to keep you all awake.
Well, from my viewpoint, I think it'll be a cold day in Brussels before the European Union permits Russian gas to come back. They have been very badly harmed by this. The people in Ukraine have suffered unaccountable atrocities with respect to this. I don't see this happening in any sort of reasonable time frame. As I talk to my counterparts and friends in Berlin and Warsaw and Zagreb, Croatia, and Athens and other places, there is absolutely no appetite for a return to the status quo. Now, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of speculation about U.S. companies buying into the Nord Stream pipeline and restarting that. That's a lot of idle attention, trying to get a lot of idle chatter, rather, trying to get the attention of one single individual in the United States. And I don't take that very seriously. So that's my view.
Is there more to be said on the issue, or can we move on?
I mean, briefly, I would just say, if you look at the pipeline routes that Russia used to transport pipeline gas to Europe, there's only one still operating, the Turk Stream pipeline, and all the others have big problems. I mean, the Nord Stream pipeline, I think 3 out of 4 pipes have been destroyed. Is someone going to pay to repair those? Are you going to find European gas buyers who want to sign contracts? Is the German government going to approve recertifying this? I don't know. You have the Yamal-Europe pipeline, which runs through Poland. I don't think the Polish government really wants to see Russian gas return to the continent. You have Ukraine transit volumes. That's obviously a problem. So if you look at the details pipeline by pipeline, the case kind of falls apart. It is true, however, that the EU continues to buy Russian LNG. And I think Russian gas is about 13% of EU gas supplies, the 27 European Union countries. It's hard to get rid of it entirely. You never say never. I mean, things can happen over the long term. But in general, I think there's pretty strong political consensus against a big return of Russian volumes.
Sorry, just to add on this, Ben, you gave like an incredibly accurate view of the political and the physical flows and ideas, let's say, out there. But there is a further element that I have to clarify, that there is a regulatory aspect to it. And the regulatory aspect right now, I give you like a very short update, is moving towards two parallel tracks. There is a sanction the track whereby we are already at the 19th sanction package from the beginning of the war. And let's say it's by nature based on not only unanimity of all member states, and you know all the problems linked to that, but let's say for 19 times we manage as European institutions to overcome those challenges politically. And the sanctions track is, by definition, a very temporary one. So a one that, let's say, addresses like a specific issue, an emergency that is out there. And then there is a track that is not that out there, but it's a more like statutory track, which is about like putting things in law. And the law will be for open-ended. So that's a more interesting track probably in this discussion, which is the fact that back in June, the Commission proposed a legislative action, actually, to cover both oil and Russian gas, Russian oil and gas. Let's say we are now in the final phase of the so-called co-decision. So the two co-legislators, the Council of the European Union and the Parliament, are finalizing their view on that. And there we will have, if everything goes according to what it seems it's going, by the end of either 26 for some parts of the spot markets and 27 for the long-term contracts, a complete ban of Russian gas and oil, which means that it's a bit more of a, let's say, long-term kind of view. And at that point, it's not going to be possible for different negotiators or different kind of like tables where this discussions is ongoing to simply say, okay, let's reopen the tap. No, because at that point there will be a law saying that it's illegal.
So sanctions and commercial prohibitions, belt and suspenders, no, to that question. I think, okay, well, while I'm asking difficult questions about gas, Ben, the European Union now requires data on methane emissions. That in 2027, we get to the next phase of the methane regulation. Can U.S. LNG exporters provide the data? What are the challenges? Will other countries and buyers start to put up these barriers? You've written a lot about this. You and I collaborated on a paper that addressed some of this, and you've done a lot of deep work. Take us through the EU methane regulation.
Oh man, how much time do you have? This is a complicated one. No, but I'll try to summarize. Basically, this is an effort by the European Union to account for all the methane emissions associated with the gas that it buys. The European Union, the 27 countries, said, look, we know there are methane emissions associated with production, with transportation. We want to understand the emissions footprint of all the gas we're buying, gather all this data, and hopefully put systems in place so that we can buy the good stuff and maybe phase out the bad stuff and do our part to reduce emissions. It's the first regulatory requirement in the world to gather data on methane emissions across supply chains. So it's new, it's never been done before, and it's quite challenging because it applies to all the gas placed onto the EU market, whether that's from the United States or Qatar or anyone else. In the United States, it's especially challenging because think about an LNG seller, right? You have companies like, say, Cheniere or Sempra, Venture Global. They don't produce the gas. They don't have any presence in the upstream. And they definitely don't have a presence in the midstream or the pipelines that carry that gas to the liquefaction facility. So basically what the EU is asking these gas sellers to do is say, go talk to your partners and ask them about their methane emissions and get all the data and piece it together and put it in a system that we can use to understand all the methane emissions associated with the gas we buy. So that is a complicated ask. The regulation is in force now. It took effect in August of last year. But it's really a multi-year phased-in process that will move in increments from now until 2030. And so it's a big challenge to the industry to comply with this. It's an imperfect piece of legislation. Sorry, Francesco, not to be too critical, but it was designed by multiple bodies in the EU at different times. That's kind of the hash of the EU legislative process, familiar to Americans who are used to Washington in some ways. The industry is trying to sort this out. The good news is that the United States is gathering more and more data on methane emissions in the upstream, in the midstream sector, and in liquefaction. And we had this tremendous growth in the kind of service companies, data monitors to gather all this data. And so we really have an ecosystem to be able to answer these kinds of questions. And tracking methane emissions is really important to the oil and gas industry. We heard Mike Summers talk about this today. The question is, what kind of system will be acceptable to the EU? And how can US LNG sellers gather all this data and comply? And there's still a kind of standoff, as I see it, that's happening between the industry and the EU. Personally, I think the EU needs to provide a lot more clarity so that LNG companies can fix this and get it done. My view is that this is just too important for it not to work. The EU is going to have to figure this out because US LNG is just too important to their energy security. We need workable solutions for industry, and we need them soon. Because, Kevin, you mentioned a really critical deadline is coming up in January 1st of 2027. By that date, everyone needs to gather important data and send it to their EU gas buyers. So a lot of things need to happen between now and then, but I'm pretty confident that the industry can move forward as long as we have a bit of simplification from Brussels.
I want to turn to Francesco and Fred on this, but I want to add another component to the discussion before we dig in deeper. This morning, Ben, you mentioned Mike Summers mentioning this regulation. He also mentioned the proposal to rescind the greenhouse gas reporting program. And so I guess my follow-on question for the two of you is first of all, how does the delay of the methane fee in the Inflation Reduction Act, you may not know this, but in 2022, the United States imposed its first national price on greenhouse gas emissions. It was a fee on methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. In 2025, the Congress delayed that fee's onset until 2034. And now the administration is proposing to eliminate substantially all of the greenhouse gas reporting program and to delay the reporting for methane emissions and oil and gas sector emissions until 2034. So how does that affect the outlook? Well, and Francesco, since we're here, will we get an equivalence determination under the Christmas tree? Which one of you would like to take that?
I start? All right. First of all, 2 comments and 2.5 comments. The half is congratulations, Ben, because you managed to summarize the main provisions of the method regulation in such a brevity that I will never be able to. But my first comment is on the equivalency. So clearly, the fact that the U.S. had an important set of regulations on GHG emission reporting and monitoring which seems to be on the way out of the, of the table, clearly will have an impact on these discussions. So far I can update you a bit on this discussion, how is it going. What we've been looking at is two possible avenues. A bit the regulatory avenue, so paper on paper. Is the GRP really an equivalent kind of piece of legislation so that we can consider that equivalent, yes or no? And in case no is the answer or partially no, should we have like a more company-based approach? The first part of the question is somehow clarifying itself a bit because EPA has already announced like officially that they will, if not repeal, like substantially dilute these rules. So let's say we find it a bit more efficient to focus on the second part of the equation, so the company level discussion. And there, I must say that, albeit imperfect, and we all know that we are the front runners there in the world, and so it's difficult to get it right from the beginning, there are several safety valves there. So I will mention three in the method regulation. So first of all, the method regulation will never include any prohibition of imports. It's not a trade measure. So it will never happen that under the method regulation we will say, no, this cargo, no. First thing. Second thing, the US industry is already at the forefront of all the decarbonization investment. So we already know through private-based instruments that I'm not gonna able to quote here because the discussions are ongoing, that a large part of the US production is already subject to a mechanism to verify, monitor, report on emissions. And third, the method regulation has already had the benefit of including this existing decarbonization investment to turn them into a competitive advantage. So I'm very pleased to hear, I was this morning, to hear Mike Summers saying, having a very positive attitude towards the efforts that the industry already made in terms of decarbonization and how this decarbonization effort is somehow adding to the dominance kind of policy approach. So I would be a bit careful in depicting the method regulation as something that will create an irritant to trade. Rather the opposite, we are working with US authorities and the industry. I mean, we are, I would say, in weekly contact with you, Fred, to understand how the system should work. Very last point, my colleagues are right now drafting the implementing rules of the regulation because always when we have such innovative pieces of legislation, usually the legislators, the co-legislators give an empowerment to the European Commission as a technical body to say, okay, the detailed rules of implementation you will draft, and then we will say yes or no. So my colleagues are now drafting these implementing rules on the reporting requirements, so that by the beginning of 27, we will have a very big clarity on, out there, so that there will be absolutely no irritant in trade.
Fred.
Okay, so I have a lot to say on this subject, so bear with me. First of all, let me just say that the U.S. oil and gas industry is completely 100% behind reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, whether they are carbon dioxide or methane. That is unwaverable, unchanged. The industry supports federal regulation of methane. That commitment is unchanged. We are also, as Francesca said, we've been working with the EU for, since this regulation was enacted, we've been working with them and will continue to work on a very positive weekly basis to find a solution. We are committed to working with them through the initial stages, which will be through some implementing regulation. However, we are also very clear in saying that at this particular juncture, whether it's here in the United States or whether it's in Europe or some other part of the planet, we are not willing to look to just short-term fixes to address long-term problems and issues. The U.S. natural gas system, with hundreds of producers, the largest natural gas pipeline system in the world, 8 exporting terminals, 5 more under construction, 3 or 4 more close to a final investment decision, cannot comply with the EUMR as it's currently written. even the best producers in the United States, the lowest emissions producers, I heard him say this in Gas Tech in Milan in September, cannot comply. So we'll do our best to work cooperatively with the Commission in this implementing phase. If we need to go back and reopen the legislation, which in our view is likely, we will be there in a cooperative, collaborative way. Now, Mike Summers talked this morning about an arcane piece of the way methane is regulated in this country. So we have a greenhouse gas reporting system. This administration came in and very early on announced that it intended to eliminate most of that part of the system, with the exception of the part in the subpart W that deals with oil and gas emissions, and has recently decided to open a comment period which runs through, I believe, early in November on that particular point. We will be making comments on that. This is a system that has no statutory basis. And as Mike said today, this administration has drawn a very clear line that says, we're not going to do anything that doesn't have a clear basis in statute. They have to do this. The Supreme Court has had two landmark rulings that very much affect where we stand. And we haven't talked about this much. We didn't talk about this morning. We haven't talked about this much in general, but the repeal of the Chevron doctrine with this Loper-Bright decision that was passed really says, listen, if Congress isn't clear on something, agency just can't go out on their own and do it. You know, so it puts the onus on Congress to be clear, and also puts the onus on agencies like the EPA to straighten up and pay closer attention to exactly where their authority lies. And so where we're headed on this oil and gas reporting is, we have 15 years of wonderful data, right? Should this program have been something that the federal government ran and supported? No, not necessarily. We're in agreement with the administration on that particular point. Is it now with 15 years of data, and Mike said they're downloading it? Do we want to lose that? No, we do not. I mean, what it shows is that the path of reduction in methane has been tremendous. And bear with me one more second. And it's going to continue. Now, I would also say that we feel very strongly that the future of U.S. LNG around the world is, from all of our advantages, one of which clearly is the fact that we are among the world's most responsible producers. We are on par with Norway and other countries that produce natural gas very cleanly.
So I take it you're saying you think we're pretty clean gas producers, and that you'll probably find a way to work this out, even though Francesco said they're not going to say no. You said it's going to be really hard to comply.
But we're not, we are really saying the same thing.
It sounds like you're in agreement.
Here's what we're saying. U.S. gas is too important to the energy security of Europe for Europe to walk away from it. It's just a fact. We are in complete agreement with that. We are in complete agreement that methane is a greenhouse gas that needs to be aggressively reduced and eliminated, and we are committed to do that. But the way this regulation is written is that the end users in the EU have to get certificates from the gas producers here in Pennsylvania. Well, there's no chain of custody in between all of that. It's the end user and the producer that are responsible for this, and it just doesn't work. Now, we are looking at a lot of different options, but
I wanted to tease that out. I wanted you to come right out and say that.
We are in agreement.
Okay, so you're in agreement. I want the audience to know that we're in agreement that we're going to ask your questions very soon, but I don't want to ignore the Asian market. It's a pretty significant LNG market. So I want to briefly ask a few questions, and I'll turn to you, Ben. Beyond South Korea and Japan, and depending on trade war, China, how are markets evolving in Southeast Asia?
So long term, all the growth in LNG demand is really going to be in Asia. I mean, Europe has been critically important global energy security question for the last couple of years, but from 2030 on, all that long-term growth is going to be about Asia, and that mostly means South Asia and Southeast Asia. The countries in Northeast Asia, Japan and South Korea are pretty mature to actually declining LNG demand centers in the case of Japan. The growth is going to come from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, even some traditional LNG exporters from Southeast Asia like Indonesia and Malaysia that are essentially going to have to import more volumes. That's where all the growth will come from. And so to me, the most interesting questions in the LNG industry right now are not about supply, because we know the supply is coming. It's about demand. We have this unprecedented build-out in global LNG supply happening right now. Last year, we had about 405 million tons of LNG traded around the world. We have about 215 to 250 million tons of LNG capacity under construction today. That's capacity, not total volumes that will be traded. That's a big number. So the big questions to the industry are, how fast can you grow that demand in South Asia and Southeast Asia? What obstacles are needed to grow gas penetration and hopefully get coal out of the electricity generating system, replace it with cleaner natural gas? And I think the picture really varies country by country. It's about what existing gas infrastructure do you have, like regasification terminals, gas to power plants, gas storage. Can you go in and sign and deal with an end user? You know, these challenges vary market by market, but that's where the entire LNG industry is concentrating, is on unlocking that demand.
Francesca, I want your thoughts on this too, but in particular, the Asian market has historically commanded a premium relative to Europe. That changed with war. Do you worry about all that growth Ben is talking about, outbidding, drawing supply away from Europe? Are you in competition with Asia?
Not really. I mean, in the last years, we've seen that prices are quite aligned with some slight premium on one side or the other, depending on the refilling seasons and so on. But what the European Union is trying to do is to, again, to give like a lot of visibility to the operators, to European operators, so that again, with the no destination clause, also like the, let's say, between Europe and Asia, there could be like a reciprocal advantage in having each other's visibility in terms of like demand. So no, I don't see that as a specific like tension point in terms of like price competing. No.
Okay. So demand side development creates a role, or at least an opportunity, for U.S. government agencies involved in trade and development. Fred, do you want to share any insights first? And also, while we're on the subject, there are other managed trade bargains that have been struck by this administration with Asian importing economies. To what extent are they a tailwind? What are federal agencies able to do to create that demand pull to go with our supply push?
Well, they are in fact a tailwind, and we are thankful that this administration has prioritized U.S. LNG. It has been a real blessing to have this return to this approach. Look, we have a number of federal agencies that have and can be very supportive. We have our credit finance agency is the Export-Import Bank of the United States. EXIM has a newly confirmed president and chair, John Johanovich, who was approved with the first block of nominees that the Senate was able to work through. EXIM, I believe their authorization expires September 30th of 2026. EXIM will need to be reauthorized. We have the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, which we know as DFC. DFC, their authority lapsed on September 30th. Their folks are furloughed along with others in the government, including the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. We heard from one of our friends there today that for the first time, USTDA, a small but influential agency that pays for reverse trade missions and front-end engineering and other related issues. Everybody at USTDA is furloughed currently. We have, many of you may not know, but in all of the U.S. embassies around the world, in addition to State Department officials, career Foreign Service officers, as well as others, we have commercial attachés from the U.S. Foreign and Commercial Service, the Commerce Department employees. There's an enormous amount of work that gets done in all of our embassies and many of our consulates around the world. Lots of places where that can come. XM can do a lot of work in financing gas infrastructure. The Development Finance Corporation is limited somewhat in its scope of lower income countries, as is USTDA. But I am sure that as this administration moves to the next phase of what can we do to help the industry, that's next. So.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to the audience. Please wait for the microphone, and let's take your first question. Great. Ken.
Thank you. Ken Moriyasu from Nikkei Asia of Japan. So in the discussions between Japanese, South Korean leaders and President Trump has demanded that the Asian countries pay for a LNG pipeline in Alaska, and the price tag is $44 billion. But like Ben said, the future demand is not in Japan and South Korea, it's in India, Bangladesh, and Malaysia, Indonesia. Who should pay for this pipeline? And to Francesco, if Japan and South Korea doesn't want to pay for this pipeline alone, and we want to buy what's available now, that eats into what's going into Europe, does that justify the Europeans paying for this pipeline as well?
Thanks for the questions. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick went on CNBC and talked about specifically this, talked about drawing down the money Japan would commit for the purpose of constructing that pipeline. And what do you guys think about that? Let's take that.
Well, I can make a run at this since I know quite a bit about the project. So this is a project in Alaska. The Alaska gas fields are on the north slope where our oil fields are. We have the oil pipeline, the Trans-Alaska pipeline that comes down. This pipeline will be constructed to serve the domestic needs of our customers, our Alaskans in Fairbanks and Anchorage. The second phase will be for a LNG export terminal that is moving forward. The gas in Alaska is stranded gas, just as some of your gas up here in the Marcellus and Utica is stranded gas. If you look at that chart that was shown earlier about where the production is, it's been flat here in Pennsylvania for 5 years. We got to fix that. Right? We've got to fix that. Well, we got to fix the situation in Alaska too. The Alaskans need that gas, they need that pipeline. They've broken this project into several chunks, the pipeline being one, the LNG export terminal being another, and they are economically viable prospects. I obviously can't comment in any way, shape, or form on the negotiations between the White House and our trading partners in that part of the world, but I can tell you that this is something that is a very strong personal priority for President Trump. He's really come to love Alaska a lot, and his administration is very strongly supportive of it being there or it's stranded.
All right, we have time for one more question. All right, we do have a question in the center there.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you can kind of tease out the GHGRP reporting piece. I mean, it sounds to me, and I admit I'm not asking about the equivalency determination piece, but like if there is no government reporting program for GHGRPs anymore, and you're going to work with companies directly, I mean, that seems problematic, I guess, in the sense of like what I'm hearing from you, Fred, on the and you too on the dynamism of there's so many operators in America, right? So it's like that feels like going the wrong direction. Like the GHGRP is a standardized reporting program, and I mean I won't comment on the litigation about or the rulemaking with the statutory authority piece, but just like, it feels like that's the very problem that you're trying to work around on, like, getting the data from producers or suppliers that buy gas from a bunch of different producers in America. I mean,
Yeah,
you kind of pick up when, yeah,
I
thanks,
can
bud.
touch on this briefly if you like.
Thanks.
I mean, what Mike Summers said today is that the reporting greenhouse gas data is really important to oil and gas operators. It's how they benchmark their performance. It's how they show improvements over time. It's important to their investors. Every listed company is going to include it in its sustainability report. They get that data audited. So it is really important to the industry to continue reporting that kind of data. The value of the greenhouse gas reporting program is that it's standardized. It's the same system that every single operator uses. And having that kind of universal standardized approach is really important. If you lose it, if you lose a federal agency collecting that data, there isn't really a perfect replacement for a government agency doing that, but we'll have to find some alternative solution because it's really important to the industry.
Yes, so let me be really clear on this. Stay tuned. First of all, the comment period is still open on this. Comment period hasn't closed. The industry is going to be commenting on this. I don't think we're going to move the administration, but this comment period is still open. We are not going to lose this system. The industry will find a way to maintain this data and this system. I can't talk about it, but there's a lot of negotiations and a lot of discussions that are going on how exactly we can do this. It may not be as perfect as if it were done by the EPA, but it's too important to lose. And so stay tuned.
Francesco, you get the last word.
Thank you. No, while I fully agree with you and Ben that there is like a clear domestic aspect of it and the importance and the relevance of this reporting for the domestic producers and exporters, then when you talk about like the methane regulation, the EU methane regulation, you go a bit outside of the domestic aspect per se, and in the relationship, in this trade deal the relationship. So here we have to see what kind of basis the methane regulation has in terms of like the science behind it, the push, the technological possibility that is behind the methane regulation when it was drafted and negotiated. There is OGMP 2.0, so like going to level 5 verification and so on. And while addressing the detail of Section W of the GHGRP, we had more than a doubt that this set of regulations in the US would tick all the boxes, basically. Which doesn't mean that it's a conclusive answer that I say, but when you go and when you talk about the company level verification, it's a way we apply the method regulation in a flexible way, because the method regulation, by being an imperfect statute, is also leaves us also like some leeway in terms of like making possible for the investments in decarbonization that already took place and that will take place in the future to actually play a role, so that we don't have to penalize those countries like the US where the industry already has made this commitment.
So I'd like to thank Andrew and the Drakewell Museum for the opportunity to join you against this stunning natural backdrop and profound and important historical background. Please join me in celebrating my wonderful panelists.
Fantastic panel. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We are going to have a very small break, only 10 minutes. I know it says 15, because we have a very special announcement that's not on the schedule. So I can't dangle out something more better than that. The gift shop is closing at 4 o'clock, however. This is your last chance to get oil swag that you never ever dreamed of. Go out there and hit it, and we'll see you back here at 3:10. Thank you very much.
Come on back. This is the best panel of the 2 days.
Almost. We're just having an announcement before that. Sam, you know what to get?
Yep.
Where it is.
You've done it.
Okay. So, as you can kind of tell, we make this up as we go along. There are a lot of metaphors for this. I think spaghetti against the wall is probably a good one. And we see what sticks. But to be honest with you, as good as ideas are, you have to have partners to work with who are willing to just bet on an idea and do so in a completely voluntary way. And so the group of people that we have here that have been with us, locals, natives of the oil region, and also internationals like my friend Brenda Schaefer up here, are all dedicated to this cause. So I decided this year that we have a very special person who's going to be leading our team, and that is the site administrator, Michael Knecht, is going to be retiring in April, which I don't know how we're all going to deal with that because, and I think Sam can talk a little bit about this, he was really instrumental to what we were doing. And actually, Sam, you had the first touch point, so why don't you explain that?
So before we did this forum, the kind of our proof of concept happened when Andrew Tabler gave me a call one day a few years back and said, Sam, the ambassador from Azerbaijan to the United States wants to come to Drake Well. Can we make it happen? And so I said, yes, of course, we can. Like, when? Like 6 months? He said, no, in 3 weeks. So I came out to Drake Well, and that week was literally the first week that Michael had taken on the role as administrator. And it was a huge relief to me. I knew immediately that they hired the right guy, because he was the first person in Venango County that not only knew what Azerbaijan was, but where it was and how incredibly significant Baku's relevance was to our region. So I knew right then that we had the right guy, and I hate the thought that he's not going to be here next year.
So to honor what you've done for us, we have decided to have a prize. And this is the first prize. This is the 2025 Yellow Dog Conspiracy Award. It's not a real conspiracy. I'm being facetious, obviously, but it's our small group that is awarded. And I'll read from here. Presents with great appreciation to Drake Well Museum and Park Administrator Michael Knecht by the Drake Energy Security Forum, October 2025. Michael, please come up here and accept your reward. You got to say something too, Michael.
Thank you very much. I'm speechless, as you can tell. I can't talk, but this is very unexpected. It's just been a pleasure of mine and the team here at Drake Well to be part of what you all had envisioned 4 years ago. And we can't thank you enough for bringing this wonderful audience to our doors on an annual basis. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. All right. Over to you, the other Michael. There we go.
Great. All right. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for having me back. This is my 4th year at the Drake Conference, and it gets better every year. And it's now reached a point when I come up here, I see people who I only see once a year, but have now become friends and almost like family. It was very nice when yesterday morning when Ms. Cubbin came up to me and was just, hey, as if I hadn't seen her in a week, even though it's been a year. So this is a wonderful event. I'm glad you guys have stayed around. We have a good panel for you. To me, the interesting thing of the last, we'll call it 2 days, we're almost done with day 2, is that the topic for this panel, or the title, Getting Energy from Production to Market, kind of has been touched upon by most, if not all, of the other panels, including Mike Summers this morning talking about getting energy to market. So I'll do a brief introduction of my panelists, starting on my right with Mark Pearson. Mark, as you met earlier today, is the president of Liberty Resources. And I thought it was important to have a producer on this panel. So even though we're looking at how do we move the energy, but having somebody who produces the energy on the panel I thought was very important. And then to my immediate right is Eric Johnson, Vice President of Eddystone. And he and Don Hauser, who's with Berkshire Hathaway, they provide the middle stuff, moving the resource to market. Don has been with Berkshire Hathaway in government affairs for about 15 years. He's also based up here. Eric informed me that he was born in Pennsylvania, in the Philadelphia area, so it's great to have him come this way. And then on my far left is Senator Scott Hutchison, who I'm sure you all know. And I think his component, or you know, how I looked at it when Andrew said, hey, do you want to moderate an energy, you know, production to consumption panel? And I thought it would be great to have somebody from government to talk about the process. And we've talked a lot earlier about permitting and being a key thing. So with that, Mark, I know you have a slide, and I have a clicker somewhere. Excuse me.
I think they can put it up at the back. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
I thought I'd perhaps start by giving you a perspective from the private oil and gas industry. You know, this industry, you know, has a lot of facets associated with it. And if you think about everything, you know, we've been discussing here, everything from getting oil and gas out of the ground to the surface, processing it, pipelining it, treating it in some way, and then eventually to the consumer or to the refinery or to the export or to the LNG. There's just a lot associated with that and a lot of different skill sets. Well, in the United States, about 40% of the drilling is done by private companies. And we don't have a big staff. And we're somewhat specialists that we kind of understand rocks and we understand how we're going to try and get this stuff out of the ground and how to maybe try and get it out, you know, better than our neighboring oil and gas companies doing it to justify an equity investor why they're going to invest in our country, in our company. But we don't know how to pipeline. We don't know how to build big facilities. We don't know how to negotiate LNG export contracts or anything like that. We're typically selling at the wellhead. At the wellhead. And so when my backers and my company, we look for opportunities to invest, we have to have pipeline takeaway capacity. Now, thanks to our current administration, it's very hard to raise money in oil. Even though I've been operating in the Bakken for the last 15 years, I can't raise money for oil right now because some people in the White House keep saying oil is going to go to $50 a barrel. And unless you're in the core of these basins, you can't make money, you can't make private equity style returns at $50 in oil. So my company, we focused on gas. And the first most important thing we have to look at is how's the gas going to get from our production well to a market. And much as I would love to be working in Pennsylvania, I can't even consider Pennsylvania. I can't even consider being here in the Appalachian because there's no way for me to get that gas to market. I don't have the expertise, I don't have the people, I don't have the access to negotiations. I have no idea about permitting a pipeline. And so we have to look at this, and we rely on other people in the industry, and it's referred to in the industry as the arch of pain. Yeah, if you want to supply gas, and you're a producer like we are, and you want to supply gas to those LNG export facilities, you've got to be within the arch of pain, below the arch of pain, because there's pipeline capacity. In fact, my company's been working a lot of deals in the Haynesville Shale in North Louisiana, East Texas, and every project that we work, you know, the big question, how much capacity is? Oh, we've got X amount capacity. We've got, you know, tens of BCF a day of capacity on this particular pipeline. It's not an issue. And so, as particular, you know, those of you here in Pennsylvania look at opportunities for this great resource, the largest in the country, to actually supply the country's energy needs, the world's energy needs. These pipelines are critical, and having pipeline capacity is critical, and something that 40% of the industry, it's very hard for us to go and address.
Okay, we're going to jump over Eric for a second and move to Don because he also has a presentation. I think your slide should, if you click,
there it is.
Should go right after.
All right, wonderful. I'm Don Hauser. I'm doing external affairs. I manage external affairs for our company in all of Pennsylvania and all of New York. So that's state and local government as well as just dealing with permitting the projects that we're talking about. But a little bit about Berkshire Hathaway Energy, in particular our company, BHE GT&S, which is Berkshire Hathaway Energy Gas Transmission and Storage. I was not focus group when that came about.
There will be a test on that at the end.
Yeah. Quite an acronym, but we're part of Berkshire Hathaway Energy. And there's a slide on Berkshire Hathaway Energy's assets from coast to coast. And there we are on the right-hand side of that map, and you can see our assets from going New York down to Florida and that little dot in Alabama as well. Pipeline, I'm going through this really quickly, just really quickly. But BHE GT&S, who are we? In this part of the state, we're Eastern Gas Transmission and Storage. That's our pipeline assets in Pennsylvania, about 1,500 miles of interstate natural gas pipeline in Pennsylvania with 300 BCF of storage in storage capacity. That's 11 storage fields that we operate in Pennsylvania. We have 17 in total, 11 are in Pennsylvania, with 300 BCF of storage. That's a lot of gas. So this panel, when we're talking about outlets for natural gas production, we're pretty well poised. And I don't have a map on this, but you've seen enough through today, yesterday, and through everybody's lives here. You've seen that overlay of Marcellus Shale going across Pennsylvania from southwest Pennsylvania to northeast PA. That's our pipeline system. So when I'm talking about 1,500 miles of pipeline, that is exactly our system. So we're poised to capture that production in Pennsylvania and move it to markets. I think I can stop there because I have other slides I can address as we get into different topics. But that's the overview of the company, and look forward to the topics.
Great, thank you. Eric, do you want to make some opening remarks kind of about your experience?
Sure. It's fascinating to be here and be where the industry was founded and see the exchange and the like, because if you go to the East Coast, that's where everything moved for a while. You think of Rockefeller Center. Many major oil companies used to be headquartered in New York. On the Delaware River in the Philadelphia area, we had 9 refineries, and that's where the demand still lies. We had 9 refineries. We're now down to 3 refineries, and there's been a retreat. So it's interesting, again, to be here because back in 2012, the Philadelphia refineries were shutting. My business partner and I were sitting in the governor's office, and we were looking at a project that assumed the refineries were going to shut, they were going to be uneconomic, and what type of process units could we take out of those and repurpose with natural gas. One of my business partner's friends stopped by and said, "Jack, what are you doing here?" "Oh, that's an interesting idea. It's dead on arrival. Don't even think of it. The refineries are vital to Pennsylvania. We have to find out a way to make them work. We'll support you. Why don't you even try to buy one? Do whatever, but don't do anything to harm them." At that point, we started to look at the Bakken shale revolution and what could be done. I think a lot of people view the East Coast to be a place where there are dragons. If you're in oil and gas, it's a horrible place to do business, they think, and it can be. But if you hit the right tune, we were able to secure a location. We secured a partner, Enbridge Pipelines, who shared a vision with us, and we were able to build and permit a terminal in a very short period of time. We were able to get our permits very simply. We got a standing ovation in the Eddystone Borough Hall when our permits were issued, the zoning variances and the like. So, as we start thinking about where we are now, there's been a little bit of fatigue from the first part of the shale revolution when everybody thought it was going to be big. It didn't hit. But now we have less refining capacity on the East Coast. We're down to 4 refineries total. And we're more and more dependent on foreign crude, foreign oil. And the challenge with that is, think of where that comes from. It comes from places like Nigeria and Angola. Who's there? Who has invested heavily in those countries? China. So it's not a problem now, but think if this trade war escalates. Think of where things can go. Think of where somebody can throw a nice little wrench. It's the East Coast, and that will be a very severe challenge. So for energy security and the like, it's wonderful that the Appalachian Basin is booming, or should be booming more. We need to develop the market, if you will, and take that energy to market and back out the foreign imports.
Great, thank you. Senator, I'm going to give you a short question. What can you do to help Mark be willing to, or be able to produce in Pennsylvania?
Great question, but certainly both of you gentlemen really made a case for why Pennsylvania is a terrible place to do business. And unfortunately, I have to agree with you in so many ways. A lot of that is predicated on the regulatory environment, the slow permit approvals. I mean, like every roadblock that government bureaucrat can think of, they throw it up there. And then you add into that, and I don't want to offend any attorneys in the room, but the lawsuit climate is also very difficult in Pennsylvania. I mean, even if you get something through the process, all the public stuff, and then a lawsuit comes, and private industry does not want to waste their time and resources fighting things in court like that. So they just don't even look. And one of those problems is about the venue of where your case is heard. I think I frequently describe Pennsylvania as 2 Pennsylvanias because the southeast part of the state is extremely resistant to any kind of fossil fuel usage in Pennsylvania. And unfortunately, with that kind of background, that's where lawsuits against pipelines or siting of new generation sites for electricity, natural gas electricity, somehow they end up in a court in Philadelphia, and that is not a great environment. You know, the General Assembly has tried to say, put criterion in place to where these lawsuits, any lawsuit can be filed, and somehow the court has said, that's our purview, you can't tell us. So, but that being said, I think there's 2 parts to the regulatory side and the permitting side. One of those, which we actually statutorily created 13 months ago, again, somebody's in between the legislature and the implementation, and you can guess who that is. But we did put in place an option for those who want a permit quicker from DEP. It's only in some categories of permits, but the thought process was if the work ethic and timelines that DEP is going to process these papers, some industries are willing to say, we will pay more money and use a qualified third-party company or individual who's qualified by DEP. They're professionals, you know, engineers, consultants, and use them to do all of the early permit approval. The final approval, of course, will be done by DEP, but having third-party review up front, most likely in a much faster regime because they're being paid extra to do that. Industry is willing to do that in many cases. I think it's a great model to try, but again, we're 14 months in and no permit has gone through that process yet because the process hasn't been fleshed out completely yet. But I think there's promise there. The other thing is a more of a longer run look at what regulations do we have on the books? Do they make common sense today? I think one of our earlier panels, somebody mentioned that, the fact that we built many of these industries and regulatory schemes based on something that happened or an industry that was changing 50 years ago, and the regulations are still in place. Do they make sense today? What can we do to remove some of those and make them more applicable to the year 2025? And the General Assembly also, again, we have multiple ways to look at that, whether it's an automatic sunset of older regulations. Some have talked about having a independent office of the repealer who would be empowered not to repeal, but to make recommendations to, they would be given a maybe 5-year time period and say, look at every single regulation on the books, make recommendations to which ones we should get rid of and change today. Again, that would be an independent agency that's separate from the governor's office because, yes, we do have an independent regulatory review commission here in Pennsylvania. However, all the appointees there are made by the governor. So they end up being a rubber stamp for his regime. So changing those regulations, making permits faster are two big things that government should be doing pronto.
That would be a very interesting job. I'll have to look out for that job announcement. Don, on that note, Berkshire Hathaway has significant assets in the state of Pennsylvania. Are you looking to expand those assets? Are you looking to build new assets? How do you factor in that? And I kind of say expansion because when I used to work for a pipeline company as well, and you guys bought some of our assets. But we were always looking to expand, never necessarily to build a new pipe to a new, from point A to point B, but just to expand our existing network was always more than enough to keep us busy.
You're right. Growth is essential in the pipeline business. If you're not growing, shame on you. And the bright side is we're growing in Pennsylvania. We have 2 projects right now before the FERC. FERC now has a full complement of commissioners, so we have 2 projects there. One has already received its environmental assessment, and another is on its way to the FERC staff reviewing the project for an environmental assessment. So those are 2 growth projects. One's in central Pennsylvania, and one is in western Pennsylvania. And the central Pennsylvania one carries gas, Pennsylvania-produced gas, that's in our storage and Leidy storage fields in western Clinton County down to Washington Gas and Light in the DC area. We call it our capital area project. The other one that's before the FERC right now is our Appalachian Reliability Project, which is totally based in Washington, PA, and that's really what this is all about. That's designed for producers of natural gas to get their gas to the interstate natural pipeline system. And that, once again, is Pennsylvania-produced gas, where producers are producing and they need that gas to go to market, and we're here to help them. Thirdly, how we're growing in Pennsylvania, and this topic has been discussed widely for the conference, is LNG. We have a company called Pivotal LNG, and we also have Cove Point LNG. So Cove Point LNG is our Cove Point terminal on the shore of the Chesapeake Bay. It's the United States' only LNG export facility on the east coast of the United States. And one fun fact of that, I always enjoy talking about this, the customers for that gas are producers. The customers are foreign customers, right? And they were tasked with finding producers to deliver gas to the terminal that we would then liquefy and put on the ship, and there it would go. One of the producers is based in Pennsylvania, and that producer produces all that gas in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania, and it goes from a pipeline down to our Cove Point facility. We liquefy it, we put it on the tanker, and it goes off. That producer did a study, and this is always a cool fun fact. 45 days is what it took from the well tip to burning or keeping the flame going on that Olympic torch in Tokyo, Japan. 45 days from that molecule of natural gas produced in Susquehanna County, PA, to lighting and keeping lit the Olympic torch in Tokyo. It's amazing how Pennsylvania is now part of the world economy of natural gas. And we do that through Cove Point. We do it through our smaller scale LNG facility, one that's right in Towanda, Bradford County, Pennsylvania. Through that facility, and I have a slide, and I'm going to zip through it, but just the bright spots of what we do, and it's okay, it's not there, but I'll talk about it, is through LNG and small scale LNG. There we are. I magically got right to it. We not only are peaking for gas distribution companies along the East Coast, Alabama, Florida, et cetera, where we produce that LNG, but you'll see on the left slide of there, that's just last month. That's Jack's LNG, the largest marine terminal LNG facility in the United States that we operate, filling, bunkering the Royal Caribbean's largest cruise ship ever built, powered by LNG. So we are sending that LNG to cruise ships. You know, the international maritime industry is going to LNG, away from diesel. We have those facilities to make that happen. Here on the second slide, you see a rocket lifting up in Florida. Mark, to your earlier point, this is not your father's rocket fuel. Rocket fuel now is LNG and liquefied oxygen. And that LNG is produced for one particular rocket launch right in Towanda, Pennsylvania, right in Bradford County. Bradford County produced gas, we liquefy it, it went on truck to Florida, and a rocket lifted up to space. So Pennsylvania really is, you know, a world player in natural gas and how we get those products to market. And we're growing, and we're doing this through Towanda. We're bunkering international shipping on the Great Lakes. Like I said, with it, the international maritime industry going to LNG as its fuel, we're doing that, and we're trucking that LNG all across the Mid-Atlantic for peaking. So when your burner tip needs to go on in that cold February 5th morning, you know, that peaking fuel might have come from Towanda, Pennsylvania, Trussville, Alabama, or Jacksonville, Florida. So these are areas that we're into, that we're developing more, and certainly with the interstate natural gas system, as long as our friends are producing more than they are, we're here to help them get that product to market.
Great, and that kind of leads to another topic that I wanted to address to you, Eric. I know it may be outside of your expertise, but I guess, why doesn't Pennsylvania have an LNG export terminal when it has all this gas?
Ouch. So I think the best way to answer that is if you go and look at the Delaware River, on first glance, it is a wonderful place to develop a brownfield project. There's so much there. But then you need to go and you need to look at a couple of things. Number one, can you get gas there? Right now, the area is constrained for gas. So there's not much spare pipeline capacity in the area at all. And who's going to sign the contracts to get that constructed? Who's going to give somebody like an Enbridge a take-or-pay contract so that they know they can construct it, they can get it through FERC and the like. And then you need to look further at what are the requirements for an LNG site. There are thermal setback zones that you need if you're near a business or something. So for instance, where we are located, we have Boeing next to us where they make all of the Chinooks. They do a lot of other work there. On the other side, we have a chocolate roaster, and the chocolate roasting business, it smells like a brownie place all the time, except when it catches fire. So there those thermal zones are very important, and our facility, I put it into ChatGPT a while ago, you're not going to do it without severely interrupting the businesses around there for a world-class LNG facility. And if you keep on going down the river, you need to put it in a place where people are going to be happy that it's there. You don't want to put it into the middle of an urban neighborhood where maybe you get it through, but you're going to be pushing it through. It needs to be a happy project because people want jobs. They love the idea of environmentally sound, safe, high-paying jobs, and LNG fits that. So there's one place where an LNG terminal was permitted on the Delaware River in New Jersey. It got pushed through. The developer, unfortunately, it was an import terminal. The developer did not realize that that part of New Jersey, all of the water at the high water line, that's Delaware's. Delaware has what's called the Coastal Zone Act. That was put in place in the 1970s when Shell tried to build a refinery, and it didn't go through. There were signs of "to hell with Shell" all over, and Delaware basically said you can't build anything anywhere on the Delaware River. So that went up to the Supreme Court, and it collapsed. And the challenge is there are people who have been involved in that in the area, and they remember it, and it was a project that took years off of their lives. So it's possible. It's going to need fresh people, and you want to put it in a place where it's a good fit. You want to take care of the Delawareans. You don't want to say, we want to do it and we're going to litigate. That might work in Texas or in other locations. If you go the litigation route, you're going to have all sorts of environmental groups, fundraising. It's going to be great for them. So don't give them a target. So long answer, but it's a challenge. There's a solution, I'm sure.
Where there's a will, there's a way, I guess. Mark, I know, as you said in your remarks, you don't produce here. But have you looked at the Marcellus as how would you view the potential for increasing production in the Marcellus? I mean, is that achievable? I think yesterday somebody referred to, discovered uncompleted wells and just how much capacity there may be.
Well, first of all, I'll say that I haven't looked at, in terms of a big subsurface review and what we might do, but just conceptually, it's a basin that's constrained by its pipeline capacity. So there is a lot of opportunity to grow that production, and where there's a will, where there's an opportunity, industry will step in and go do it. So I have no doubt that if there's the capacity to get it to market, then this area can grow significantly. The question is, how's that going to happen? And I think the other thing I come back to as well is that 40% of the whole industry in the country is private companies. We kind of feel like we're out of the opportunity to come work in Pennsylvania.
Senator, on that note, so what's going on in Harrisburg that might alleviate some of these? I mean, you talked about some initiatives, but are there other initiatives? Is there support for reform?
On paper, regulatory reform is a bipartisan issue. And I think you will find folks on both sides of the aisle saying, we disagree on a lot of things, but we agree with you that our regulatory climate is not good. Our governor has, as I said, we did do the independent third-party review legislation. He did sign that. Again, it's been slow to be implemented, but he did support that. And I'm hoping that the cooler heads will look at the bigger picture. I'm also going to give a shout out, and I think some of the other panelists in earlier panels gave a shout out to both of our U.S. senators, both of whom have been common sense leaders and willing to talk about the importance of positioning Pennsylvania in the energy environment. So the one thing I wanted to say, it almost seems that as a layperson, as I look at a map of Pennsylvania, I say, well, we should build our own pipelines within the state, and then we'd control it. But then, because of the constraints we have here, it almost seems like it's easier to do an interstate pipe. That if you cross a state line, all of a sudden the Pennsylvania regulators are way down on the totem pole. The projects that Mr. Hauser was talking about, those are interstate. So they were able to get some stuff done. Again, maybe I'm missing something, but that's my thought is cross the state line and maybe it'll be easier for you to get some of this pipeline. But getting our gas to markets is critical for Pennsylvania to grow. And north of us, you know, we could do so much if we could build a pipeline going up into the Northeast states. It would be transformative for those states and their gas prices that people pay to heat their homes, et cetera, et cetera. We could change the Northeast immensely if we were allowed to cross the lines and get a pipeline going up that way. But as much as I sort of doubt that there is a happy place in southeastern Pennsylvania to locate a facility, I hope I'm wrong. It's an even more daunting task to get the ability to cross that New York line and then get some pipelines going up that direction. But I hope I'm wrong, but that's sort of how I see things today.
Okay, I'm going to give an anecdote on this topic while everybody thinks of their questions. And when I'm done, then I will open it up to the audience for questions. And the anecdote is, and this was probably 15 or 16 years ago even, Adam Szyminski, who I think may have left, I don't see him here, but Adam and I attended a conference of the U.S. Association for Energy Economics. And the panel was about New York, and New York prohibiting shale development. And Adam's question to their environmental representative from New York's DEQ, Adam's question was, do you regulate the dairy industry and the farming industry as much as you're doing the gas industry? And the guy he didn't even almost acknowledge the question. He's just like, next. Because he knew that they don't, because it's a much stronger, much bigger political lobby for the dairy industry. So any questions from the audience? I know you're tired. Oh.
Just a minute. No, I'll get you.
I got you.
Okay.
Thank you guys for coming. We had a lot of conversation earlier about AI data centers in Pennsylvania. It seems to make all the sense in the world for those to be powered by natural gas. And I wonder, even with those projects that have been listed, what's the timeline and the burden for taking pipelines to Shippingport or to the one in Homer City in Indiana County and those kind of projects? What kind of burden and timeline do we have there?
Hypothetically, and this goes back to the senator's point about timing of permits. If it were a FERC project, if we were building a new pipeline and we needed a new compressor station for any type of project, right, it would be a 7C project with the FERC, and that timeline is roughly about 16 months. So you build that in, and to your point of it maybe being easier, I don't know. 16 months is a long time to apply and get your certificate from the commission to go ahead and build your project. And within that timeline, you build in your state and local permits as well. But to your exact point, it could be done in a variety of different ways. If our pipeline system or any pipeline system were near a project, a data center, it wouldn't necessarily have to fall to that pipeline operator to build that lateral. It could be a GDC, a gas distribution company, which would not then go to the FERC. It would be a PUC issue at the state. So there are different ways to do it. Like I talked about that 16-month timeline that the FERC roughly about from applying to getting a certificate. That could be truncated by months doing it that way. Or the route, if a data center were proposed in an area not near an interstate pipeline, then you're talking about a project that could be permitted in around 16 months. So that would be the timeline. Well, you know, if you're not near like a gas distribution company that has that capacity on its line to serve the need for the demand of a data center, right? That's a large demand for natural gas. You would need the help of an interstate system to get that there. Could be. Let's talk.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on data centers? Okay. Go ahead.
So my understanding is there is an unregulated pipeline operator in the eastern part of the state who had tried to build an interstate pipeline and connect it up to New York. That failed. And like all good things, after a while, they have spare pipeline capacity, and they are looking to try to get data centers co-located on this interstate Pennsylvania pipeline. So there is an opportunity there. Who knew?
Okay. Sid?
Following up on this question here about if you can't move gas out of the state, then of course, and probably thought of this, then you use it in the state. Can you wheel electricity, or is that just as problematic if you just produce electricity, not for data centers, but just wheel electricity across the state? Or could you make fertilizer and ship that across the state? Or would any gas-fired project be problematic because of environment?
The only thing I'll say, I think we have transmission lines today, but if you start talking about massive amounts, then you're going to talk about building that system bigger, and that's tough. I don't think there's a connection between that electricity was made by natural gas, therefore we don't want it in New York. I don't think that's the thought process. I think it's more we don't want a transmission line, or we don't want this transmission line is here upgraded in a massive way because we don't like transmission lines. They like the electricity. They want that electric light to turn on when they flick the switch, but they don't want necessarily building new transmission.
Anyone else want to comment?
Yeah, I'd add to that to your question, there isn't a shortage of demand on natural gas. For our system in particular, the last 3 years, we've set records every single year on the throughput of our interstate system. So there is no shortage of demand. It's about, really expanding use of natural gas. Like we talked about LNG, we talked about small-scale LNG. Is there an aerospace industry, right? Growth there. Is there an opportunity to get in jet fuel, right? Can we make sustainable jet fuel with LNG or natural gas? There's a lot of opportunities there to discuss on how we get that product to market in Pennsylvania. And as long as technology keeps exploring new avenues, that product is always there to lend a hand.
Any other questions from the audience? Put that microphone down, Andrew. We're not done. Now, I had a quick follow-up question, Don. Your pipeline network goes through Pennsylvania and into New York, right? And New York doesn't have an issue with that gas, but they do have an issue with shale gas moving across into the western part of the state. Mark earlier today in one of his charts showed that, 90% of U.S. gas is fracked. I guess, is that gas going up through the pipeline that's there also fracked, and do they not have a problem with that?
I think we can safely say all gas is fracked, but and yes, our pipeline system goes well into New York, up through Buffalo and into the capital region of Albany, and we are partial owners of the Iroquois system, where that gas is taken into Connecticut and Long Island and New York City, so into the downstate as well. So like I said, the records also include our system in New York for demand, and the demand is not going away, even in New York. I think that's evident every year. When we look at our run times of engine, we look at gas throughput through those engines in New York, we are setting records. There's no shortage of demand in New York State, no matter the politics that are there. The folks, the businesses, the burners tips, those nursing homes, schools on Monday mornings, they need to turn on February 5th. They need, the burner tips need to fire. And there is growth there, and I think there's a couple more projects coming down the line for New York State, and hopefully that opens up the window for more.
Okay. Any other comment? Any other questions from the audience? No? Okay. Well, with that, I don't know if we solved the permitting issue in Pennsylvania, but I think it's been a great discussion, and please give the panelists a round of applause. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thank you very much. We are going to be going, probably starting this panel a bit earlier than, but I'm going to take up some time and give credit where it's due, which I normally do at the end. So those of you that are on the final panel, the Ambassador Jeffrey, Brenda Schaefer, Shahani, and of course we have Victoria Coates and Ambassador Ibrahim from Azerbaijan beaming in. But I wanted to talk a little bit about those that make this all possible. We have them up here on this placard. I've already talked about. You got a chance to meet our collaborators here in the Oil Region Alliance in the Venango Area Chamber of Commerce, particularly in Oil City yesterday. But as you can already tell from our award to Michael Necht for service rendered, the Drake Well and the Friends of Drake Well are certainly in this category of our supporters, and I really just can't thank you all enough. We couldn't do this stuff without you. You have the capacity and the spare capacity to make everything possible, you know, from name tags to venues like this and so on. And I would encourage all of you to think about these venues for upcoming events. We did that. This is the first time. There's no reason why you can't do it. And I can tell you where to buy these monitors really cheap. Or maybe you can rent them from us. Who knows? Looking for business opportunities. So that's on that stamp. We also have two long-term supporters of ours that really helped us take this to another level. And that is the Commonwealth Foundation here in Pennsylvania, outstanding organization. Liz Stell is here somewhere, or was here, I think. She's a very busy lady. She's probably working on her laptop in the back. She interviewed G.T. Thompson and Mike Kelly. She's out there, great. Outstanding organization, very hands-off. They get the right people here. They beat the drum. They got the folks from Indiana County up to talk to us. That doesn't happen all the time, right? And to see what kind of opportunities like we see in Homer City up here, and hopefully that leads to something. And of course, the Heritage Foundation, Victoria Coates, my former boss on the NSC, is just an outstanding organization. We heard from Kevin today, in detail. I spent a lot of time with the folks at Heritage. And I really just can't thank them enough. What I love about them is they just produce so much data that I rely on all the time. And it's all part, what I also like about them too, and this goes for Commonwealth, is they're just strong enough and confident enough to put their ideas out there, and they're not really afraid for people to come up here and disagree with them. That's very unusual. And as you know, in this organization, we try and rely on that respect for difference of opinion up here to really have it out and to have a logical discussion. Right? And then we move from there. And that's what we're going to be doing with what we found here this year. Everything, because it's live streamed, will be put into the transcript, and then we're going to boil that down into a report that we're going to be providing to people in the sort of government sector and also in the private sector. But I can't thank anybody enough, really, who've been with us from the very, very beginning, and that's Seneca Resources, just an amazing organization, really cool, also hands-off, amazingly, right? And they've been with us, literally from the beginning. So we can't, and Rob Bulwar is here in the back. I think he's the lone representative from Seneca. He's also the coolest representative from Seneca. Yeah. Everybody knows Rob, and I hope he's going to party with us tonight. But then we have what we call wildcatter sponsors. Why do I call them wildcatter? Because the term in the industry, wildcatter, came from where? Petroleum Center, a hollow in Petroleum Center is called Wildcat Hollow, and someone drilled there, right? Nobody thought there was oil there. They made fun of him or her or whoever they were exactly. I'm sorry, I lack the knowledge of that. And they struck oil, and forever those that are bold enough to go out and find something where no one thinks it is located, it's a wildcatter. And so of course, we heard from Mike Summers earlier today, sponsored our dinner last night, amazing organization. They're coming back, okay? And they might have left, or their last sort of on-force visit here might have been in 1959, but now they're gonna be much more engaged, and I really appreciated all of Mike's comments. But also who have been with us from the beginning, who sponsored the lunches for us, is Shell. Now, why is Shell important? It's not just a major oil company, which it totally is, and we have two representatives from Shell. I hope you've been able to meet them here today. There we go, ladies. And yes, exactly. Why? Haley and Deanne are not just real super nice people, but they are today, as you see in the program, I wrote the stewards of the Oil Creek brands, Quaker State and Pennzoil. They now own those two brands. So you don't only own the Standard Oil version in Pennzoil, but you own the independents as well who are represented in Quaker State. And that battle is one that we all know very, very well, and the struggle between Standard Oil and price fixing and actual market forces. So we really appreciate you, and thank you for your support from the beginning. We also really want to support or express appreciation to Cubbin Resources and Nancy Cubbin, because it was without her donation, not to us, but to Friends of Drake Well, to support a high-speed internet connection, fiber optic, into this facility, all of this would not be possible. Because before we came here, there was not a fiber optic connection for Friends of Drake Well. It allows them not just, we rent it for 1 day a year, and they get it for 364. Pretty good deal, right? And that's really important because now we have seminars up here. The legislature, I believe, has seminars up here. And it also will allow them, hopefully in the future, to get the gift shop online, right? We need to sell that stuff out there to the international community. There's definitely a demand for it. And I'm challenging Friends of Drake Well. We'll work with you to get that stuff out there, and we'll make sure that the people in this audience buy it. But we also have some other new contributors this year. National Fuel is sponsoring our train ride on the Oil Creek and Titusville Railroad from here up to the Titusville Iron Works. We're very, very happy to have them with us this year. But also Eddystone Marine and Rail Terminal. We heard from Eric a little bit earlier. Really interesting story, and every little bit counts. But I can't really, also Airedale Oil and Gas, another branch of the Cubbin enterprises here have been instrumental, and they actually not only bet on good ideas, but they're also my former next door neighbors up on Hassan Heights. And really appreciate you and your support. And of course, our John R. Cubbin, who works for BP, who was here the last 2 years, was unable to attend, but we're very happy to have his father here with us as well. Thank you so much for your support. And of course, last but not least, the Barbara Harvey Morgan Center for the Study of Oil Heritage at Oil Region Venango Campus. Great facility. They're scanning all their records into digitalized form, applying for grants and so on. So really can't thank you all enough. So I'll be thanking some others here at the very, very end, but what I'd like to do at the moment is to try and have the last panel come up a little bit early and get into place, and maybe we can set things off, maybe adjourn a little early and start the celebration. And usually the Oil Creek and Titusville shows up early, despite my best efforts to tell them what time to show up. So I'm not going to doubt they're going to show up again early. So Ken, Brenda, Ambassador Jeffrey, if you could come up, and Johanny as well.
We don't have the Zoom people yet, Andrew.
I understand that, yeah. We don't have Victoria Coates, and of course, Khazar Ibrahim is beaming on at 4:30, I believe, right? Yeah. So he's going to be late regardless. There's going to only be four.
Okay.
Yeah, four.
And who's moderating?
Ambassador Jeffrey's coming up. Ken is moderating in the center. Sure.
Whoever's moderating.
Yeah, that's Ken.
Okay, you got the right one.
Yep.
Okay, everything's...
Right there, Ambassador.
Andrew, are we waiting for Victoria? No, please go ahead. Oh, okay. Hello, welcome to the final panel of the Drake Forum. My name is Ken Moriyasu. I'm a writer for Nikkei Asia, based in Washington. Nikkei Asia is a Japanese newspaper. Nikkei Asia is the English language arm, so I write in English. So this is my third time hosting this panel. And every time I come, I learn something about the history of this region. And every time I'm really stunned by how it's relevant to me, because Edwin Drake started oil production in 1859. My newspaper, Nikkei, began its first printing in 1876, which is 17 years after the beginning of oil production. And our newspaper, Nikkei, used to be called Chugai Bukka Shinpo, which translates to Domestic and Foreign Commodity Prices Bulletin. It was issued by a trading house called Mitsui. It was an in-house bulletin, but it had the commodity prices of around the world. And in the first edition, December 2nd, 1876, there is a section that talks about oil prices. And in 1876, oil prices was probably news about this region. So Nikkei is 12 years older than the Financial Times, 13 years older than the Wall Street Journal. It's a very old newspaper, but we started by reporting about Drake. So I wanted to start with that. I have some wonderful panelists with me. Ambassador Jim Jeffrey, former ambassador to Albania, Iraq, and Turkey, now at the Washington Institute. Professor Brenda Schaefer of the Naval Postgraduate School, and a consultant to many companies, a world leading expert on the Caspian region, and Juhani Platt, formerly at the State Department, now with a brand new consulting firm called the Meridian Bridge Consulting. And on Zoom, Victoria Coates, former Deputy National Security Advisor in the first Trump administration and the Vice President of Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Hello, Victoria.
Hello.
Right. So today's topic is about the weaponization of energy. Energy has been weaponized before. In World War II, the Soviets successfully cut off the Germans from the Caucasus energy fields, which turned the tides of that war. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo really changed the way people think. But from there to until very recently, the weaponization of energy calmed down, partly because countries like Japan, through the Arab oil embargo, realized that we have to diversify our supplies and then reduce energy consumption. And then the world was moving to globalization. So there was a period where energy wasn't weaponized too much. But since 2022, I think it's come roaring back with the war in Ukraine, the great power competition between US and China, and also, as we've talked all day, about the emergence of AI. So there are three topics of the weaponization of energy that I want to talk about today. First is President Trump's pressure on countries not to buy Russian oil to try to end the Ukraine war. That's number one. Number two, President Trump's efforts to import LNG to countries like Japan, South Korea, India, Taiwan, to make America the world's dominant supplier of natural energy, and whether countries would choose to import American energy regardless of market fundamentals, or does it come to market fundamentals at the very end? And thirdly, the last topic is China's dominance on critical minerals. Why did we get here, and what could we do about it? So first, I want to start with Victoria. I would like to ask what President Trump is trying to do in his efforts to end the Ukraine war, and how he has pressured India and Turkey, the second and third largest importers of Russian oil, maybe not so much China, the top importer. What's the calculation there? So Victoria, if you could take that.
Well, thank you, Ken, and it's wonderful to see you all. I'm heartbroken not to be out at Drake this year, especially given those beautiful visuals that you've set up, Andrew. The conference looks absolutely fantastic, and we will for sure be there next year. But it's a fascinating question, Ken. The issue is, yes, indeed, India and Turkey. Well, put China to the side for a moment, but the thing that I think is really driving the president right now, even more than those two, is the fact that Europe imported more energy from Russia in 2024 than they ever had before. And they all complain about Slovakia and Hungary, and yes, indeed, they are very open about their imports of Russian oil. But at the same time, that's not going to move the needle all the way to the most European imports of Russian energy since ever in 2024. So I think that is what the president is really insisting has to stop, and that he is not going to put those secondary sanctions on, say, China, if the European Union won't cease those imports and also put those secondary sanctions on China. Because, of course, that does come with some domestic economic pain, but at the same time, there's no reason the United States should endure that economic pain if the Europeans aren't willing to do it as well. So I would say that's the first and foremost thing. The second thing is India, and I was very encouraged by the president's comments about Prime Minister Modi at the summit in Egypt yesterday. I think the two of them can leverage their personal relationship to work together the way we worked with India in the first Trump term when they were at that point in importing a ton of Iranian energy. And they told us they couldn't possibly stop. They needed it at that price point. But we worked with the Saudis to increase production. We increased our exports, and they managed to get to zero. So that can be done. Anybody who tells you it's impossible is lying to you. And I think that is a huge play for the president to do something with an ally that puts a lot of pressure on Putin to get to an end to the war.
Okay, I'll go to Juhani. Let's talk about India from their perspective. What were they told during the Biden administration, and what are they being told now?
Yeah, so I think, can you guys hear me? So I think that this issue has been evolving over the last few years. You know, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, there was a lot of talk about how to cut down on Russia's oil and gas revenues, but the concern at the time was Russia was the third largest producer of crude oil, and I think accounted for about 10 to 12% of the market. And so the United States and allies had to look for ways to cut down on that revenue without completely shutting the door and causing a price spike in the global market. So that's how the Russian price cap policy came into place, starting with the G7 and then with a couple of other partners. And the idea was to restrict Russia's ability to ship its crude oil to buyers using Western ships with Western insurance companies over, over a certain price ceiling. Price ceiling. So that was very effective in the beginning at cutting down on Russia's revenue while still maintaining a stable global oil market. Over the last few years, Russia has found ways to circumvent that. There's a shadow fleet that's grown up of ships that don't use Western insurers, and they're technically not violating the price cap by shipping above the price cap on those ships. And I think the important thing to understand for India is that, especially in the beginning of the war, we weren't telling India not to import Russian crude oil. We wanted them to import it, but we wanted them to negotiate hard discounts so that Russia would be forced to accept less revenue for that oil. And now I know that the president's very focused on trying to get India to cut down on that. I think some of the challenges there are that India is very focused on energy security, very sensitive to inflation, and also I think wants to continue playing a balancing role between the U.S., Russia, China, other powers.
So, Ambassador Jeffrey, has that kind of pressure worked before to force a country, you talked about Iran during our lunchtime, to reduce oil imports, and why is that different from now?
Well, first, Ken, thanks for having me on, and Andrew, being up here with Mr. Pratt, with Brenda, with Victoria. Hi, Victoria. it's like old days. And old days are all about energy and war, and it goes beyond weaponization of what Ken is basically talking about is energy trade. At the tactical level, ancient fleets all the way up through Trafalgar used the wind in the sails as a tactical measure to gain military superiority. The British shifted under Churchill and Jackie Fisher, Admiral Jackie Fisher, from coal to oil for their fleet just before World War I. That not only made the fleet much more effective, it also pushed the British deeply into the Middle East, previously just a way stop between India and the United Kingdom, now an end in of itself. So it has huge geostrategic significance directly in the military, obviously, as we've talked about for 2 days, in the economies of country. It's also manageable. It's a finite thing, so many barrels, so many BCMs, so many ships, so many pipelines. We most of us, Pratt and the people in the Energy Bureau know that we all had that, all these numbers at the tip of our tongue, tip of our fingers rather. So anyway, yeah, where it worked, and this was also done by the Energy Bureau of the State Department back in 2012, 2013 under Carlos Pascal and the famous, infamous Amos Hochstein, was to use the National Defense Authorization Act to squeeze Iran's exports by secondary sanctions. You would pay big time with the United States, including in U.S. courts, if you bought Iranian oil. That pushed the oil down, I think, well below 500,000 barrels a day, probably a 70% cut in Iran's exports, thus in its earnings, because what oil they did export, they had to sell at a discount. And the result was the nuclear agreement, whether you liked it or not, the JCPOA of 2015. So it can work. I think it's having more of an attritional effect on Russia, but that's a very broad discussion. We can continue.
Right. So Brenda, we discussed this in the car. You don't think that President Trump's strategy of pressuring India and Turkey will not work. Why is that?
So first thing, I think in general, when we evaluate sanctions, too often we evaluate how many barrels were we able to squeeze versus did we achieve our national security outcome, right? So is Russia out of Ukraine? Is Russia thinking of leaving Ukraine? Did Iran stop developing its nuclear program, stop supporting terror proxies throughout the Middle East? Like, we don't really achieve our goals. Why do we go for economic sanctions? Because we don't want to go for war. We don't want to go for real national security tools. So we go for sanctions because it's almost cost-free. It's something we could say to our constituents, we're doing something, we're taking action, we can make speeches, right? But we rarely evaluate it in terms of the foreign policy outcomes. I agree with Ambassador Jeffrey that getting Iran to, this did have influence on getting Iran to a deal, but the deal didn't necessarily stop, or evidently did not stop its nuclear program, and certainly, and it wasn't even a condition of the deal that it would stop its support for terror proxies.
That's a different issue. We're talking here about using policy to squeeze trade to get results. Whether the results are good or not is an important, but I think separate question. The point is the oil weapon worked in that case.
Right. So I mean, I think that we just need to expand our toolbox in terms of national security. Sanctions should be, very selective. And then going to the bigger idea of, taking the model of Iran as maybe a model for Russia. With Iran, it was the period of time when we were sanctioning Iran was at the height of the growth of the U.S. shale. U.S. shale was able to respond, so if there was market demand because Iranian oil was going off the market, was able to respond quickly. We can't take off 10% of the world's oil, take off Russian oil and not have, catastrophic economic implications. So it's really, it's not an option. What have we done through doing this oil cap is that, okay, one, we've legitimized oil trade with Russia. So you're saying, like, we're telling India, sure, buy it, but buy it only at a price that we say. And what we've done, it's almost like Russia and China and Iran's dream, is one, we're having Russia and Iran give cheap oil to China, so we're helping the Chinese economy through our sanctions. And we've pushed them together inadvertently to have a sanctions-free, like you said, trading system, shipping system, insurance system, and so that really cemented this new alliance between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And again, it wasn't our goal to provide cheap oil to China, but that's what we did with all the economic implications.
So let's talk about what it means for Russia. You talked about sanctions-free, but if indeed India and Turkey do reduce the purchase of Russian oil, doesn't that hurt Russia? Doesn't that impede its ability to continue the war in Ukraine?
I mean, I think it's, very similar to, let's say, take the case of Iran, where you can have, Iran can't keep the lights on, has frequent blackouts. In mid-October, around now, Tehran is basically at a no water level for Tehran, right? Despite all those conditions, they always have money for the Houthis, for Gaza, so I don't think, we don't see any signs that because of declining revenue that Russia saw any reason to pull out of Ukraine or stop the war. It will have to be when there's a whole different set of incentives.
China. You said yesterday that even if India and Turkey reduced its purchases, China would just buy it out.
Right, so it's like just another mechanism to get cheap oil to China, which obviously isn't our goal if we see we're in strategic competition.
So China has to be in the discussions.
I don't know if China has to be in the discussions.
Trump has to pressure China just as much as he does.
But it's not going to happen.
Why is that?
Again, going back to essentially, if you have secondary sanctions on buyers of Russian oil, even if it's just by saying either do this or you'll get tariffs, or because there's explicit sanctions, we can't take off 10% of global oil and not have a price spike that's tremendous, that would kick the whole world into a whole thing beyond world global economic crisis.
You talked about that during lunch, that energy can be weaponized, but weapons can go after the energy as well. Tell us about how the double-edged sword kicks in. Right?
What?
The double-edged sword of trying to sanction.
Yeah, though Brenda did it better than me.
Okay.
In that if you take somebody's energy off the market, if you reduce the price they get for it, that's the sweet spot, because then you don't have an impact on total oil in the market, but you have an impact on what they're earning, which is whether you want to get them to make a specific decision or just make them weaker, that helps. But if you're actually trying to take oil off the market, then you're faced with the fact that supply and demand, it's a fungible quantity, it's a global market, and so as we've heard, you take 10% off. What did you say, Brenda? It sends prices through the roof?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the double-edged sword, period.
But Johanny, you were handling American export of energy in the State Department. What is the situation of the global oil market now compared to when Putin decided to invade Russia in 2022?
I think we have much more diversity of suppliers now, and supply is going up. The EIA is forecasted, increased levels that it's going to put downward pressure on prices next year. But Russia is still a significant producer, so I don't think we can look at options to completely take that supply off the market. But you do have new suppliers like Guyana, Brazil, others that have come online, and of course the U.S. is producing a lot.
So Victoria, let's talk about Saudi Arabia, which is a key player here. If Trump wants countries like India and Turkey to move away from Russian oil, the expectation would be that Saudi Arabia would come and fill in that gap. Do you think Saudi Arabia is willing to do that?
Well, I've always been one who thinks it's time to put the AM back in Aramco, and I think the energy coordination between Saudi Arabia and the United States is critical because, the big three producers are the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia, and if Russia isn't playing ball, which obviously they're not, then that relationship between us and the Saudis becomes critical. And that's, as I was saying before, what we leveraged in 2018 and 2019 when we were able to get India entirely off of Iranian imports. And we even helped China. They still cheated, but it was kind of de minimis. They're cheating so brazenly now and importing so much both Russian and Iranian energy because they didn't fear during the previous administration significant reprisals. And that's something that, yes, President Trump is working on, but it takes time. And as you say, you have to do that process and work with the Saudis. Don't just demand that they turn the spigot and increase. You work with them, figure out who needs what degree of crude, and then also figure out, how they can increase production in a way that's consistent with their economy and their goals as well. So I think that is much more likely to happen now. Obviously, the relationships between the Trump administration and Riyadh are very strong and warm. And so I think that when they see us increasing our production as well, and I believe EIA had our oil production in July at the highest level ever. So when they see us doing it, they're more likely to do it as well. So again, it's a process, Ken. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is possible. We've done it before.
Yeah, so Victoria, let's stay on the topic of Saudi Arabia and what their mood is like in terms of cooperating with the US. So I feel this Drake Energy Conference, every time we convene, there's something happening in the Middle East. In 2023, the Drake Conference started on October 9th, 2 days after October 7th. Last year, it was just after the Israelis succeeded in taking out Nasrallah. And this year, it comes after this peace deal and the hostages being released. So how does Saudi Arabia look at this political outcome? And do you think it's getting ready to join the Abraham Accords, for instance?
Well, I do think they're playing a critical role here, and it's a little bit behind the scenes in that, the countries that have already joined the accords, of course, are Bahrain and UAE and Morocco, not Saudi. But, it's very difficult for me to see even UAE, but particularly Bahrain, joining the Abraham Accords if they were not done in coordination with Riyadh, and that the Saudis were perfectly comfortable with that development and very comfortable with things that we've discussed at the forum before. That the Chevron's purchase of Noble Energy in the Eastern Mediterranean literally 3 weeks before the accords were finalized. That simply doesn't happen unless the Saudis sign off, because there's no way Chevron is going to expose its business with Kuwait and Saudi Arabia for the sake of Noble Energy, which of course is a wonderful company, but a drop in the bucket compared to their business with Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. And of course, Noble controls the Israeli Eastern Mediterranean gas fields. So that decision has already been made, in my opinion. The question becomes one of timing. And this deal that the president inked yesterday and the willingness of the Israelis to engage in that deal, and then the willingness of such a broad range of Muslim-majority countries to engage with that deal, I think that comes with some pretty significant Saudi leadership. So I would say they have to be pretty happy with how things went down, both yesterday and at the United Nations General Assembly this year, and that they're very, very comfortable with the administration, and that's pretty easy to see. And there are even rumors of a potential visit here in Washington in November. I don't know if that's true or not, but the fact that it would even be rumored, it's the first time in a number of years that might come to fruition. So I would see this as a potential golden age for U.S.-Saudi cooperation.
And I think we have Ambassador Ibrahim, Azerbaijan. Thank you so much for joining us in your busy schedule. Can you hear
Thank you
us?
very much. Unfortunately, I'm also online together with our great friend, Victoria Coates. I just had friends from Turkey here, so I have to entertain them. I think that's another great player in the region.
Yes, all right. So we were just talking about President Trump's efforts to try to end the Ukraine war through pressuring India and Turkey, not so much China, to stop their purchases of oil. but you come from Azerbaijan with a very, perhaps the most strategically thinking leader in the region of our time. From your standpoint, how does this effort by President Trump look? Do you think it could help end the war in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, again, I want to apologize for not being in wonderful oil city in Pennsylvania, which I dearly miss and love. Hopefully I'll be back. We're planning to have some event, and that's also for Dr. Coates in Philadelphia next month. A great event about Azerbaijan's constitution and sovereignty. So there cannot be a better place than Philadelphia to have the event. So you're all very much invited. And that's actually a bridge to answer your question. When the United States, and especially the leader like President Trump, steps up and puts all the right policies and tools to help not only calm down, not only solve the problems and issues, including the Ukraine war, including the war in the Middle East, but also in general helping to provide for the energy security, not only of the West, but globally. That's quite notable. And of course, United States and President Trump needs friends, allies, and partners. And here we have my country. Here you have Azerbaijan, which has always been a staunch ally and partner of the United States, and not only on the energy field, but since we're talking about energy, since it's about the energy security, so it's very important when we bring into this equation geopolitics globally and regionally, that the backbone of US-Azerbaijan Energy Cooperation is absolutely strong. Since 90s, we had this cooperation. And since 90s, we did it within the framework of a lot of geopolitical challenges. So geopolitics did not disappear overnight. But at the same time, we did not play the games. For countries like mine, which came out of the shell of the Soviet Union, it was very important not only to have its own energy policies, but also, again, much more importantly, to show its own credibility. And that's why for the last 30 years, and I see that we have Brenda Schaefer there and some other friends who know much deeper and much more in details all the things, but I think the biggest outcome of this cooperation is that Azerbaijan came out as a reliable partner, which never renegotiated any deals we had, even though we could have, even though we had some issues, but we thought that partnership, alliance, and friendship is much more important than extra revenue. This is very critical. That's very important. So we did all these grand things, but today, and I want to come to today's realities, when we're working with the US government on energy security, again, we're coming from that heritage, and that's great that we're having Heritage Foundation here, but at the same time, we look into future, how to work with the United States in every direction to help the United States on energy security. And I will give you just one fact. Azerbaijan today, even though our reserves are not the largest in the world, but on natural gas, we are number one exporter of natural gas in terms of diversity. So we're exporting gas to 14 countries. There is not a single country in the world with much more reserves than Azerbaijan who is doing that.
Okay. So now that we're on the Azerbaijan topic, I was going to give everybody 1 minute each to talk about Azerbaijan and the recent peace mediated by President Trump with Armenia. So I'll start with you, Brenda.
So, yeah, the peace declaration between Armenia and Azerbaijan that was signed at the White House in, I believe, August 8th or early first week of August, it's really fundamental. But I think it reflects actually very old principles of geopolitics. So for 27 years, 20% of Azerbaijan's territories were under Armenia's occupation. Armenia was supported by Russia and Iran, and so it had a sort of a deterrence. After 27 years of diplomacy, second track, conferences, meetings, basically Azerbaijan went and retook its territories. The minute there was no more territorial dispute, there was really you don't need a long peace process, you don't need a lot of meetings. The issue was actually, ended. And I think this is really important for a lot of conflicts where we really like to it's easier just to kick the can down and talk, and everything's about process. But sometimes, well, mostly, the only way to really end the war is actually to end the war. And that has to be, in case of where there's an occupation of one country by another, you have to end, to end that occupation. And I think the two final factors why the timing of this agreement was one, Armenia was relying mostly on Russia and Iran as foreign backers. Russia was probably clear for about 3 years to Armenia that it's not going to really come to its aid. But the minute after the 12-day war that Iran was no longer able to help Armenia, seemed very weak. It seemed the logical choice to Armenia to go towards a peace process. And I think President Trump's personality and energy actually, pushed this across the finish line. And I think it's very important. There's going to be this road it's going to cross 32 kilometers across Armenia and connect Azerbaijan's exclave, which is sort of its Alaska, with the main body of Azerbaijan. But actually, it's going to connect Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Central Asia, all the way to the border with China. And what's really important here, not only is this incredible new access that's developing that could be a counterweight to Russia and China in the region, but the United States is back in the region through this road, through the negotiation of the peace process. And for too many years, the U.S. was missing in action in this geopolitically important region.
I want to say just one thing about that. I've always said that Turkey is extremely important to Japan because we're on both sides of China.
Yeah.
And Japan's fantasy or desire was that Turkey would unite the Turkic brothers and become a major factor, and then not stay silent about the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, who are the Turkic cousins. And then China would have to worry about the West side and Japan. So through the bookend, being the bookends of Eurasia, we could deter China from taking aggressive action. But now, as you say, the US is also part of this. Gets us even more excited. But anyway, Ambassador Jeffrey, about Azerbaijan.
It's good for Japan.
It's good for Japan.
Yes.
Yeah, 6 points, and I'll do it in the limited time you gave me. 1, wars matter, and their outcomes matter. 2, U.S. policy for much of the post-Cold War, even part of the Cold War, has tried to deny that. Donald Trump is an exception. He understands that wars have consequences. We see this with Iran bombing. We see this yesterday with Gaza. We see it with this. 3, the bad actors, because of war and the fact they haven't done well in them, Iran being bombed to hell by us and the Israelis and having their proxies one after the other taken down, and Russia tied up in a war that's a war of attrition and a frozen conflict with a country 1/4 of its size, don't really look like good power players or potential allies and protectors for either Azerbaijan or Armenia. 4, Trump gets this. At some level, he's got a scent for geopolitics. He's not an isolationist. He certainly doesn't want to change countries' internal makeup. That's his Riyadh speech. He doesn't want to put a lot of troops on the ground for another Iraq, Vietnam, or Afghanistan, but he's very interested in playing geopolitics. 5, but beware, Victoria, Andrew, and I experience this. Unless you put together an A-class team of mid-level bureaucrats, that's Victoria, Andrew, and me, to follow up, Trump's ideas are going to collapse, be it in the Caucasus or be it in Gaza. Mark my words, this is my biggest worry about everything he's doing.
That was number 5. I think you have what's the sixth? Okay, all right. So Juhani, your turn.
Yeah, maybe turning back to energy, while we have Ambassador Ibrahim on, I would maybe highlight the critical role that Azerbaijan has played in Europe's energy security. So while I was working at our embassy in Greece, that was when the last leg of the Southern Gas Corridor was completed, which was the result of 20 years of diplomatic effort and governments in the region working with industry to get that pipeline finished. And it was there just in time because then in spring of 2022, Russia started turning off the spigot of natural gas to Bulgaria and southeastern Europe, and having that extra gas coming in from Azerbaijan was critical for Greece, in addition to US LNG, to be able to provide alternative supplies to Bulgaria during that time of crisis.
Victoria, any words on Azerbaijan?
Yes, just to sort of wrap up and riff a little bit off what Johnny was just saying, seeing President Aliyev at that summit yesterday in Sharm el-Sheikh really struck me because I was thinking about the collective energy might represented in that room. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Azerbaijan, under the United States' leadership. That's not something Russia or China can produce or even begin to offer the developing world. And so, as we go forward and we go into our bright, shiny AI world and all of the energy needs that are attendant upon that, we have to be mindful of making sure the developing world is adequately supplied with dense, reasonably priced energy to produce the power required. And I think Azerbaijan can play a key role on that, not limited to, but perhaps focused on developing countries in Southeast Asia and Central Asia. I think this is just a critically important element. So as I said, delighted to see the president there yesterday.
Very interesting. Ambassador Ibrahim, while we have you, do you have words on the things we just said about Azerbaijan?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that on the 6 points of Ambassador Jeffries, who is the Dean of Ambassadors probably, I actually took my notes, what you said about the need for top bureaucrats to implement what the President Trump wants to channel. It's really important. It's really critical because great leaders, great statesmen have the vision, have the policies, but at the end of the day, it's diplomats and bureaucrats who need to implement it. So thank you very much for that. I will remind bureaucrats when they don't do that. But on energy side, I think I would like to highlight 2 points, not 6. One on Azerbaijan. One, what is different today that Azerbaijan has capabilities for niche areas. That's one. And 2, we can do that, and we do that with our partners. I'll give you a couple of examples real fast. One is Syria. Basically, the only source for Syria today in terms of electricity is Azerbaijan. And it's Azerbaijani natural gas which goes through Turkey to Syria. We have the swap agreement, and actually Qatar is also involved there. But basically, literally today, Syrian people have some electricity because Azerbaijan, its company SOCAR, is sending natural gas there. So this is niche areas where not many others can do something. For that, you don't need just resources. For that, you need political will, determination, and you should be able to work with your partners. And that brings me to the second point about the partners. And partnering with Turkey, of course, comes very natural, but also with the United States. We did together in our region on the Caspian Sea, and we helped European energy security of Europe. Today, we're working together with the US companies, not only in our region and not only for Europe. Today, SOCAR, together with Chevron, is in Israel, on Tamar gas field, and in some other places. So that gives more boost to Azerbaijan's capabilities to be a great partner for the United States, for the West, and in general for global energy security.
Okay, thank you. So I am going to skip the American LNG part and go straight to China's critical mineral dominance. So, Juhani, why are we in this situation where China has almost dominant position on critical minerals? It was very clear during the past several months during the US-China trade tensions that China's decisions to limit the export of rare earth and critical minerals really had an impact on America, and America had to take action to adapt to that. Why are we in this situation today?
Sure. So, as I think everyone knows, China really dominates, especially the processing of critical minerals and rare earths. So I think they're up to between 60 and 80% of nickel, lithium, cobalt, things we need for batteries and other technologies. I think the way they got there is that they were willing to do some of the work that I think the United States and other countries weren't willing to do, because the processing of critical minerals is incredibly dirty. It produces acidic wastewater, low radioactive byproducts, things like that. And I think China made the decision in the 80s and 90s to sort of centralize and industrialize this, within a particular region of China. And so
this was during the Deng Xiaoping area.
Right, starting with Deng Xiaoping, but continuing. And so I think over time they developed economies of scale, know-how, technologies to do that processing that, frankly, other countries, didn't, and other countries were happy to buy those processed products from China. So I think you see a big focus by President Trump and the administration now to try to build out more domestic capability to both mine and then process these materials. But I think it's an interesting question in terms of national security that I'd be interested in hearing what the rest of the panel has to say. I think we'll never be able to do it for the same price that China can, or at the same scale. So there's going to be a trade-off in terms of costs. Prices that the manufacturers will either have to eat or pass on to consumers. And so I think this is one of those cases where the administration, and frankly this was true during the Biden administration also, they feel that it's worth it to take on those extra costs to have secure supply chains and not depend on China for processing.
So you're saying the processing is very dirty and pollutes the water, pollutes the rivers, and everybody was happy to have China do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are ways to mitigate it, and we did have some processing here in the United States, but we had one facility that ended up shutting down that I believe we're looking at reopening now, but partly because the mitigation for the byproducts of this processing is expensive.
So if America wanted to bring that supply chain home, that would be more dirty and more expensive.
Yeah, but I don't think it all has to be all in the United States. There's a dirty little secret of U.S. policymaking is that sometimes administrations like something that the previous administration did, and they just change the name and make it their own. So under the Trump administration, there was the Energy Resource Governance Initiative, which was looking at ways to diversify critical mineral supply chains. That continued under the Biden administration as the Mineral Security Partnership, and which then sort of expanded on that and looked at actually launching projects around the world, working with partners. Each partner would sponsor a project in a part of the world that had these particular minerals or resources that we needed to develop mining and processing that was aligned with higher energy, social governance standards than what was being produced, in China. And so that Mineral Security Partnership is still going. I believe Japan or South Korea is chairing it right now. I don't know that the Trump administration has weighed in on whether they'll continue U.S. participation in that or not, but I know it's something that the State Department's been looking at.
So Brenda, are American consumers ready to pay a higher price so that they have more energy security in terms of critical minerals?
So for a number of reasons that you just mentioned here, I think we need to, instead of trying to compete with China on critical minerals, because we'll never succeed, and you can't have a market where you pay more for a commodity in one place than another. That's not a successful way to run an economy. But that we need to, instead of trying to run in China's game, like let's say the Chinese are marathon runners. They're good at that. Let's say America, we're sprinters. We shouldn't try to be marathon runners. So that's why, I mean, we should, if we're good at sprinting, that's what we should be doing. And we'll never be better at marathon than the Chinese are. And that's why we need to reduce our needs for critical minerals. And Chinese have done so many campaigns to convince us that what we need is, instead of the unlimited, almost unlimited energy that the United States is blessed with, instead of us needing fossil fuels, what we need is wind and solar that they produce. What we need is to put transportation on, everything on electricity so that we're dependent on their critical minerals. And you can even see this in campaigns. Take the issue of natural gas. 10 years ago, we could have been sitting here at Drake, everyone in the room, including the environmental organization representatives, government representatives, everyone would be talking about switching from coal to natural gas as the right thing to do, that's the best thing to lower inflation, lower emissions. Late 2018, 2019, with no new research, with no breakthrough, with no game changer, suddenly natural gas is the enemy. And suddenly seen with no new change in research, strange sentences. Methane is more potent than carbon dioxide. Methane is 84 times more potent than carbon, 84, not 80 or 85, 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And things that are really without any research. At the same time, it's also when China learned it couldn't frack. And it had a problem because it's one thing if the United States is the strongest military in the world. It's another thing if the US has the strongest innovation in science. But if the United States, because of cheap energy, became the manufacturing capital of the world, that's really dangerous. And suddenly at this point, China together, pours lots of funds into environmental organizations, other international organizations, and overnight natural gas becomes the enemy. And we need instead to buy their EVs, to buy their hardware for solar and wind. So I think we need to be very careful about what the assumptions are. When things benefit China, there might be a hidden agenda that really isn't about climate or isn't about the environment.
So I want to go to Victoria about dependence on China. What is the debated heritage about the dangers of being too dependent on Chinese critical minerals and rare earth elements?
Well, it's robust, and I'd like to start by thoroughly endorsing my friend Professor Schaefer's remarks. They were extremely, I think, well taken and important, particularly for the region where you all sit. And to the rare earths issue, I don't think it's an accident that China threatened their most recent restriction of exports of processed rare minerals, because we have about a 6-week stockpile. And if you think about it, what's going to happen in 6 weeks? People are going to be running around wanting to buy all sorts of things that have rare earths in them for the holidays. And if they can't get those materials to make those goods, there's going to be a huge hue and cry. It's not that they'll be more expensive, they just won't be available. And that is going to be a problem for the US consumer, and obviously then a political problem for the administration. So I think that was an important timing point behind China's activities. And our view is very much that we see the natural gas as the fuel of the future. We did a big year-long project last year called Chinese Handcuffs, which was all about how they had deliberately set up the scenario Brenda just laid out to make us dependent and try to make us reject our own advantages in the energy field. That does feel like it's reversing. That's a great and good thing. But we are still going to need these things. So the other thing we want to look at is something like the president's Rwanda DRC deal. Can we move processing to those resources? Is that possible? Do it in Africa rather than doing it in China. There are all sorts of complications to that, but it's certainly worth having that conversation and seeing if the proper mechanisms for transparency and transactions can be set up.
Okay, thank you. So we have 4 minutes, open to questions from the audience. Josh.
Thank you. And I just wanted to, my Josh Block, I'm here with Pasha Holding from Azerbaijan. I want to acknowledge my friends and colleagues there. And just on the critical mineral point, and acknowledging the recent agreement and the trip corridor, I just wondered if folks wanted to comment about the importance of Azerbaijan as a transshipment point of all the critical minerals that exist across the Caspian Sea, and hopefully the U.S. is going to begin to access. The other direction is China, and so if we want those minerals to come out, they have to come out through Azerbaijan, perhaps Turkey, and across the region. And is there any thought to enhance cooperation with Azerbaijan in order to make that a more critical linchpin in our critical mineral rare earth strategy? Thank you.
Let's go to the ambassador for that. The importance of Azerbaijan.
Well, I'll talk about that, but I think the question was how to make Azerbaijan a linchpin. So we cannot make ourselves a linchpin. Somebody needs to step up, and probably the United States. But anyways, I'll try to answer, since basically it's my second home here, so I can speak on behalf of the United States maybe already. Look, TRIP, it's, of course, it's road. It has the name of the president. Having the name of President Trump by itself gives a lot of boost to this road, but also because of the name, which is for peace and prosperity, also gives it a different connotation and different scope. The sky is the limit, I think. It can embrace everything. Being a linchpin, but linchpin for what is critical question to answer. And here we're talking about railroad, we're talking about highways, potentially pipelines, potentially grids, you name it. So yes, it can be, and probably it will be, the transit route for the critical minerals, but at the same time, for many other things. Yes, of course, we're talking about fossil fuel here, we're talking about natural gas. This is very important. If we're having pipeline, natural gas can be transported too. But at the same time, why not to have all this excess electricity, which we have and will be having in Azerbaijan and beyond, to transport over this TRIP corridor. So again, it can be used in many directions. It will be used in many directions. And sky is the limit. Let's work together. But we cannot make ourselves a linchpin. Okay. We need to cooperate together, and we need a lot of help.
All right. So we have 1 more minute. So 20 seconds each for all of us. Let's talk about Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Donald Trump. In 1 year from now, who will be in the best position and why? I'll start with Professor Schaefer. Okay, or how do we describe President Trump's foreign policy in one word? And will that help him be in a more advantageous position than Putin and Xi?
So I would say actually their foreign policies are driven by very similar strategy or worldview, which is realism. And that's why in the case of Russia, it was realism but with miscalculation in terms of Ukraine, meaning that on the basis of what the Western's response to 2014, assuming that the 2022 would be a similar response, so it was a miscalculation. But I think in general, the three of them share the realism view, and that's why they're certainly, I mean, why Trump is so unique in foreign policy in the United States is that basically the neocons and the progressives have the same foreign policy, which is to change the world, which is to fit the world into the way you want it to be and not as it is. Trump looks at the world as it is, and he responds and he sets policies to as the world is. And I think that's why he's so far has had many successes.
Okay, so I'm going to Victoria next. I'm not going to the ambassador for this question. It's a little too sensitive. So I'll go to Victoria. What's your sense of President Trump's foreign policy?
I think I can sum it up in about 6 words, Ken. It's peace through strength and prosperity through peace. He wants to get to a strong America to create peace, and that's what he's literally doing right now. And then he wants to use that international peace to increase America's and everybody else's prosperity. So I think that's really the basis of it.
That's pretty good.
Juhani?
Good job, Victoria. Thank you.
I don't know that I can do better than that. Yeah. I'd maybe just highlight again, his foreign policy is much more transactional than previous administrations. So he's very focused on where can you make a deal, where can parties come out ahead, things like that.
All right. So to close it off, we'll go to Ambassador Jeffrey.
I'm just going to say, in other words, what my 3 colleagues have said. It's strategic. That's the good news, because I don't think we've had strategic since George Bush 41. Again, the problem is it's Baroque. Okay? Think Greenland. Think Panama. And so you have to have an acquired taste of Donald Trump to be able to follow what's going on and support it. It's a challenge. Some of us meet the challenge and spend a lot of time arguing that he's doing the right thing. But again, it is strategic, and everything that my colleagues have said are correct. Aside from being Baroque, again, the one worry I have is you need people at the high mid-levels to stay on these things and work them, or they start falling apart.
All right. Thank you. With that, we will close our panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent presentations. Thank you, colleagues. It's always great to be here with you. I'm just going to hand things over to the Drake Dialogue's chair, Stephen Burns, for his comments, and then mine, and we'll adjourn to the party.
Okay, Andrew always puts me in the unenviable position of being between you and lunch or you and a cocktail hour. So I just want to be really quick. I want to thank you all for your sitting through a long day of conversation and presentations today. The panelists and those of us that tried to put the panels together for you are principally volunteer labor. I would ask as we go to the reception, please come up to me, give me recommendations or your thoughts on the panels, topics we missed that you would like in future revisions, things we should dig a little bit deeper into, or things that maybe even things you think we might want to eliminate. I would love to have any feedback, and I just want to again thank the audience and then thank all of our panelists, because much like us that put this together, like I said, the panelists are mostly volunteer labor as well. So thank you to them, and thank you to all of you, and let me turn it back to Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And I really want to thank you personally, because the only person in this forum that's ever gone from being a speaker to actually moderating and panels and so on was me. And I know what that's like. It's a big, to go from keynote speaker to what Stephen's done this last year, and to really I think, raise the level of the dialogue here was just something spectacular. So thank you so much, Stephen. Yeah. Titusville is very proud of their native son, and I think we're going to celebrate that tonight. But in addition to that, I just have a few other people to thank, actually a long list of people, some of whom are with us in various capacities, some of whom are volunteers. Michelle and Denise Jones, Michelle was our organizer this conference, thank you. Our interns, Lily Scalise, Clarice Carlson, Jolene Felmy, and Isabel Anthony, who have been running social media and various aspects of it. Greg Akari, who has been running social media with my friend Tatiana Anderson. Thank you very much. And of course, last but not least, who was running the intern squad, OCHS world history teacher, Angela Scalise. But the list doesn't end there. I'd like to thank Mark Motter of Mertz Productions, Luke Rio of Stream TV, Jeff Corbett of Professional Audio Services, Devin Zagar of 7 Foot Productions, Gary Scott of Homefront Photography, and Kyla Parkinson of Victoria City Art and Frame. All of them contributed in one way, shape, or form to making this a bigger and better event. I want to thank you personally from the bottom of my heart. You're going to be meeting another great guy tonight, Bob Joyce of the Titusville Iron Works. It's true, he runs for profit, but he also did a heck of a lot to make this a success, including landing the OC&T Railroad, which, as usual, didn't show up. They showed up earlier than I wanted them to, and I heard the whistle blowing outside, and they're waiting for you. So thanks to Bob. But together, there's the Titusville team, as I call them, Michael Necht, who you met before, Emily Weaver, Sarah Bell, Sarah Goodman. We really appreciate all of your support. And of course, our collaborators, the leaders, John Phillips, Susan Williams, Kat Thompson, our Venango County commissioners, Sam Breen, Ken Bryan, and Chip Ravomowitz have been actually excellent. And last but not least, I would like to thank my father, Clarence Tabler, who's sitting in the back, who's very patient, yeah, and just an all-around great guy. Last but not least, we run this thing on a shoestring budget, in case you hadn't figured it out. I run around here and dropped some pounds I needed to drop anyway, right? And I just wanted to say to you, as free as these discussions are, as we say in Washington, and I think up here as well, freedom isn't free. If you would like to donate to our enterprise, we are a 501c3 organization as of last year. either see me or just go to our website, drakeenergysecurity.org, and hit the donate button. And I'll be happy to meet with you and talk to you about this year's program and next year's. With that, I'd like to adjourn the 2025 Drake Dialogues. Thank you for your attention, and please adjourn out to the OC&T train platform at Drake Well outside for the reception and ride up to the Titusville Ironworks. Thank you, and we are adjourned.